Okay, thank you for your patience. Welcome to Fundamentals of Income Tax. This is what we call our Level 1 course. This is an introduction to personal tax returns, just general basic tax returns. Some people in this class will have done taxes before or have seen tax returns before. Some people will be brand new. That's perfectly fine. I can pretty much guarantee whatever level you're at, you're going to learn something interesting in this course. That's my goal, is to make this interesting and fun. We're going to spend a little bit today just getting used to the classroom, the virtual classroom in particular, also a little bit about myself and what we're going to expect, and then all the tools and resources. Then we'll be taking a break. And after we take a break, we'll come back and we're actually going to do Chapter 1 today. So I want to make sure, again, everyone can hear. We've kind of done this already, but generally speaking, if you are having technical challenges at any point, send an email to myself, or if you're in the chat window and your technical challenges are there, just type it in the chat and say, I'm having a problem. Again, we have a wonderful moderator for this course. My name is Sandra, and we're going to introduce myself more formally later, but we also have a moderator named Nancy, and she will be helping with all of the technical challenges as well as tax questions. If we ever have a scenario where the classroom gets shut down, you get kicked out of WebEx for some reason, that can happen. If we have a power outage or something goes wrong, try to log back in right away. If you can't log it in right away, give it 5 minutes, try again. If it still doesn't work after 5 minutes, expect to get an email, and you can always try again at that point. When you get an email, we'll update you with what's going on. If we have to, we can reschedule classes that need to be rescheduled, but hopefully we should be able to go as planned. Haven't had problems in the last year or so, so I'm expecting it to go very smoothly. Okay, welcome to everyone. I'm going to start today with a Treaty 7 Territory Land Acknowledgement. These learning materials were developed at H&R Block's Client Support Center. We call that the CSC in Calgary, Alberta. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that CSC is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. In Winnipeg, where I'm teaching today, Winnipeg is located within Treaty Number 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, the Innu, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota, and it is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. We recognize this training is offered across Canada and many regions, and we encourage you to get to know the land you work, live, and play on. All right, a little bit about myself. So you've seen me on camera very briefly, but here's my photo. Again, I'm mostly not going to be on camera because you have a lot on your screen you need to be looking at, but at the end of every class, I will turn the camera on so that you can talk to me directly with the chat window. If you have any questions after class, if you need help, I will make sure I'm available for that. About myself, I have done 9 tax seasons with H&R Block. A tax season for us, when you start working in tax, you define your life around the early months of the year. So February to April is our busy time. I've done 9 seasons with H&R Block, starting in Brandon, Manitoba. Then I did 1 year in Toronto, Ontario. Then I was back to Winnipeg after that. I've worked at several different offices here. I specialize in complex returns, so my official title is Master Tax Pro. I do returns that are for deceased persons and trusts. I also handle a lot of small businesses, and I do corporate returns in Manitoba as well. I've worked as an instructor for 5 years, and the courses that I taught, predominantly I teach this one. I really enjoy teaching the fundamentals course, but I've also taught employment expenses, capital gains, and newcomers to Canada. And then you'll find a lot of people who work in tax have another job or another interest in their life. In addition to being a tax professional, I've been a professional musician for 12 years, and I work as a music teacher with private lessons on violin and harp. So that is what I do when I'm not doing this. Okay, a couple rules of engagement. Just generally, we do expect any discussions to be respectful of other students. Everyone is learning. I don't really think there's ever a bad question. Generally, if you have a question, there's probably 10 other people in the class who would like to know the same thing and just haven't gotten around to asking it. So please use that chat window as much as you possibly can. We're not going to be using audio for students very much. It's too difficult with a large class to have all the microphones on and a lot of background noise. But if you do have a really major concern, especially if we're on a break, you can always raise your hand, which is that little hand icon, or type in the chat window and say, I have a question, but it's too difficult to type, and we can put you on audio if you have a microphone on your computer. And generally speaking, I do ask that everyone be kind to each other, be supportive of each other, and talk to each other as much as you can. Get to know the other students in your class using those chat windows. Hopefully we can create a classroom atmosphere where we're all participating. Obviously no swearing, no abuse, and please do respect the class times. I will start on time every class. We go through a lot of material very quickly in this course, and I will not be able to slow down and go back and review if you've missed it. If you do have to miss class, there will be recordings. This class is one of the classes being recorded, which is useful for you because you're going to have me on the recordings. And you will be able to see those. I'll talk more about that later, how to find them and where they're going to be. But do come on time if you can. I think you learn more by being here so that you can ask questions if you have any. Okay, we're going to do a little orientation. So we're going to get used to some of the tools that we have at our use. And for this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. We're going to go back to our regular page, which is our WebEx page here. So again, everything will have jumped around. That's perfectly fine. Make sure you can now see your participant window and your chat window on the right side of your screen with your regular WebEx, and you're going to see my Welcome to Tax Academy screen in front of you as well. Okay, and we're just going to practice. Most of these we're kind of getting the hang of. But again, I'm going to clear everything on this side, and what I'm going to say is I'm going to ask everyone to go to their participants window on the side there, and I want you to give me a green check mark if you've had coffee today, and a red X if you have not had coffee today. And I'm going to put a red X next to my name. I'm having orange juice and water because if I had coffee, I would talk even faster than I already do, and that's not going to be good for anyone. All right, so I can see Saskia, you also have not had coffee, but a lot of you have. That's great. Definitely on a morning class, we kind of want to make sure we have that energy and we're paying attention. We're going to be using these check marks and red X's all the time. You're going to notice when you do, that means that I will know things about you individually. We will also have opportunities to do things that are a little more anonymous, so we're going to talk about that as well. If you're a little nervous sticking yourself out there, putting your neck out there and saying something personal, we're going to have ways for you to do that that are anonymous as well, but we're going to use this. Now, there are some other fun things we can do here. We also have emoticons. So what I'd like you to do is look to the right of your green checks and your red X's, and you're going to see some emoticons, and there's a little drop-down arrow. You can expand that out. And I'm going to say choose an emoticon that reflects how you feel today. Give myself a little generally pretty happy smiley face. I always like to meet new students. All right, Brittany is definitely in a coffee mood. I've got Baoying, also happy. Wonderful. And I've got Helene with sunglasses. That's wonderful. Kulwinder is looking a little surprised. That's great. So you can use these as well if there's something that is surprising you or stressing you out. If you're really tired, let us know how you're doing. When we're on break, we're going to use these as well, just so that I know if you're away. When you come back, you'll be able to say you're back. So you'll see me on break, so I'm going to put a little coffee sign when I'm not at my screen. And that means that I need to take a break to get some water or something like that. But if it's not there, if you don't see that, it means I am here and you can ask me questions in the breaks if you need to. Great, and we're going to now try the chat window as our third one. This is probably the most valuable resource for me, which is the way that you can speak to me directly or speak to the class directly. If you look in the chat window, you're going to see a little box that says send to all participants. It's very important that you choose all participants all the time. If you're sending private messages, I might get the message, but nobody else in the class is going to see your question, and then it can be a bit confusing. So make sure it's set to send to all participants, and then what I'd like you to do is type your favorite food in the chat window, and let's find out what everyone's favorite food is. And I will put mine in there. All right, Valiant likes seafood. Got some pizza. We've got pierogi, fried rice. I put chocolate because chocolate is absolutely my favorite. Oh, Dutch food. That's interesting. I don't know if I've had Dutch food. Poutine. True Canadian. Absolutely. Brittany, anything with pasta and an unholy amount of sauce. That sounds pretty good. And Shelly says all the food. So this is your #1 resource. You're going to notice I keep an eye on this chat window because I like to know how you're doing. I will answer your questions as much as I can. If I miss a question, I promise I'll go back and I'll get it, or just ask it again. But use the chat window as much as you possibly can to let us know how you're doing. If we're going too fast, if we're going too slow, you can let us know that as well. And again, if you have questions, I guarantee half of the class probably has the same questions and wishes somebody would ask it. So please ask as many questions as you can. It's going to make this whole class more fun for everyone. Okay, so that's the general sort of individualized types of interaction that we can do, but we're also going to be able to do some sort of slightly more anonymous interaction and slightly more creative interaction. So I'm going to switch now to a blank whiteboard. Some of this we'll be doing on the slides. Some of this we're going to do just on a whiteboard like this. And we're going to see if we can get some annotation tools set up. So if you look at the top, you're going to see some tools that will let you mark a part of your screen. So I'm going to ask everyone to go to the very left and find the arrow. And this is going to give you a little personalized arrow. So click on the arrow and then click anywhere on the screen, and you're going to see it's going to put your name somewhere. This one you don't get to pick the color of. You're just going to get a color. And you're going to notice that you can only pick one arrow at a time. So if I ever need you to say this side of the screen, that side of the screen, you'll be able to set your little arrow somewhere. Mine is going to say virtual training. Yours will say your name. Great. And so we're going to continue on with this. Somewhere near your arrow, I'm going to ask you to find the drawing button, which is 2 to the right of that. It looks like a little pen. And you can draw a little shape. Now this one you can change the color. So I recommend if your color is currently set to yellow, you're going to see a little color box in there. Drop it down. Yellow is really hard to read on white, so change to something else. I've got H&R Block Green. I like to use that color. And we're just going to draw a little shape with our little pen marker. And let's see, I'm a terrible drawer, but I'm going to give myself a little kind of flower shape there. Good. And you should be able as well to change the line size, so you can experiment with that a little bit. And we're just going to cover this whole whiteboard with things. We've got some smiley faces, got some little curls. Once you draw on it, you have to click away before it shows up for everyone else. All right, and Saskia, if your name's not there, you can put a little name marker. It's the little arrow on the left side of your toolbar. You can drop a little name arrow down to claim a part of the screen. Okay. If you've done that and you've got some ideas there, I'd like you to play with some of the other ones. To the left of it, we have some shapes. You will notice that you have some circles and you have some boxes. You can make a nice little box. And you have some X's. So this is going to be another way that I will be able to ask you for yes or no questions, or to circle or make notes on things without having your name on it. So there's no pressure. No one's going to know if you were the one who said the right answer or the wrong answer. We're going to be using this in class for sure. Give everyone a chance to play with that a little bit. And if you've got that going and you're feeling pretty good about that, the other thing you can do is take the text box, which is the little T, and I'm going to say type the city that you are currently in right now. So I'm going to put Winnipeg. And again, when you type in the text box, after you're finished typing, you have to click to a different part of the screen before we're going to see your answer. So you can use, Karina, you can use the chat window for that, or you can actually just type anonymously on the screen using the annotations. We've got a bunch of Winnipegs. We've got a London. Is that London, Ontario, or is that London, England? All right, Natalia, to put your name on the screen, you have to go to the top, which is the little arrow on the left. Click on that arrow and drop that arrow somewhere onto the screen, and that will put your name there. All right, we've got a Calgary. Excellent. And a Sanford. London, UK. Does the time zone make this class a little interesting if you're in London? And we've got a Steinbach, a couple of Steinbachs. Wonderful. Okay. The last thing I'm going to ask everyone to do is find the eraser button. And let's see if we can make some of this go away. So you're going to notice next to all of those neat little tools that we also have an eraser button that you can use to erase pretty much anything you want to erase. Okay. Are there any questions about annotation? I will be using these tools to make the class as interactive as I possibly can. And you're going to get lots and lots of practice with this. Okay, not seeing any questions in the chat window, so that's great. We will definitely be using as many different resources as we have. And the next one that I'm going to do is one more, which is polls. So this is a way, I'm going to switch whiteboards here. So this is all going to go away. Give me a second here, just to go back to the beginning. And what we are going to be doing is we're going to be doing some polls, which are just sort of multiple choice questions that say either testing the material or just testing how you're doing in the class right now. I might use these for attendance some days, so we'll see how it goes. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to double check that I set this up correctly. I did. I'm going to open a poll. You should notice in the bottom right corner of your screen there is a polling question right now. And the question is, what is the most accurate statement that reflects your experience with tax filing? Pick the one that is closest for you. And when you're done, make sure you click the submit button at the bottom so that it registers your answer. So the first one is I've never filed a tax return, or other people have filed tax returns for me. Option 2, I have filed a tax return for myself. Option 3, I have filed a tax return for myself and others. Option 4, I've worked for H&R Block as a client service professional, which is a CSP. They do front desk work. That would include if you've been an office leader but you haven't done tax returns. Or I've worked for H&R Block as a tax professional. And let's just get an idea for how the class is doing. So I've got about 9 more people I'm waiting for answers. We've got 6 seconds left. So let's get those answers in if we can. Hit the submit button. Okay, and I'm going to show the poll results. And we should all be able to see the answers. So we've got about 5 people have never filed. We have 2 people have filed for themselves. We've got a few people who filed for themselves and others, and then we've got a handful who have worked for H&R Block. I did miss a few people, so if I missed you, if you didn't get to the poll in time, just let me know either after class or if you're comfortable with it in the chat window. Let me know if you have filed tax returns so I can get a sense for your experience with taxes. I will confess that I did not know anything about taxes before I took this course myself. I did start with this course 10 years ago, and I had never even seen a tax return, didn't know what they were all about, even though I was doing my master's degree at the time, because my mother actually works for H&R Block, and she had always filed my returns for me. But at that point, I thought, I want to see if I can figure out how to do this. I was really interested in it. And I started taking the course and I really enjoyed it. So you don't need any experience at all to do well in this course. What you do need is dedication and time to do your homework. So as long as you are doing the readings and you're doing your exercises, you will do well. Again, if you are comfortable with tax returns, some of this is going to be review for you. But I promise you there will be new things because taxes are changing all the time. And I'm pretty sure as well there are going to be a few details in this course that you maybe had forgotten from before or hadn't learned. So I will do my best to give you as many interesting real-world examples. And if you have any interesting things that you've come across in doing taxes, either for yourself or for others, or you have any questions, let us know as we get to those chapters and as they're relevant, because one of the best ways to learn about taxes is to see how they work in the real world. Great. So the next thing that I want to do is start to talk about some of the resources for this class. So for that, I'm going to just switch back to sharing my screen. Again, everything's going to jump around here. You're going to get really used to this with time, but we'll go a little bit slower today. So you're going to see your screen is going to jump. You're now going to see my H&R Block board. And make sure you go up to the top, pull out your participants window, pull out your chat window, take them off to the side somewhere so that you can see. Okay. And you should be seeing my H&R Block page. I'm going to go to the home page first, which looks like this. ULearn is one of the places where we're going to have the most useful resources for this course. I already know you all have access to ULearn because you can't get into WebEx without having access to ULearn. But I want to talk about a few places where you can find more information for this course, things that are going to be useful. If you ever do want to get back to the home page, generally speaking, if something is green, you can click on it to get back to the home page. At any point, you just click on the green H&R Block logo and it will take you to the home page. You can also go to the tools. You'll notice these drop-down boxes. You usually need to make sure you've opened it up, so you're going to hover your mouse over the home, and then you can choose the welcome page. Once it's highlighted in green, you can click on it. So a couple useful places to go, and if I go too quickly or you want me to go back, just drop a note in the chat window and tell me. But the first place that I want you to look for is your community. So we have places where you can get resources as a student, and you access those resources by going to the Connect and choosing All Communities. So again, I'm going to go up to my toolbar, hover over Connect, choose All Communities. I will have different options than you will because I have multiple communities as an instructor. I can tell you when I'm logged in as myself personally because I also take tax courses to improve my knowledge every year. I have even more of these. I have some corporate ones on mine. But for your purposes, you should see a community that says Inkling and a community that says Tax Academy 2022. I'm going to start with the Tax Academy 2022. So if you can, I want you to click on that. And when you get in there, you're going to have the option of topics. I always go to topics first. It's the best place to find your menus. And then you can choose English or French. My French is deplorable, so I will pick English. It's the one skill I wish I had that I did not learn when I was in school. And again, I might have extra things that you don't have, but in your case, you will definitely have a folder called Tools and Resources, and you will definitely have a folder called Fundamentals of Income Tax. So I'm going to start with Tools and Resources. Let's see what you can find in there. Okay, and what you're going to find in here is a number of really helpful quick sheets. So the quick sheets are what we call things that are just how do I do something really, really quickly. One of the ones we're going to talk about in a future class, probably not today, is using split screen. But definitely if you're at home, you're working on a computer and you only have one screen and you want to be able to see multiple things at once, using split screen is going to help you because you can put half of your stuff, maybe your textbook on one side of your screen, and you can put your workspace on the other side of the screen. We'll be reviewing this multiple times, but that quick sheet is going to help you figure out how to do it on your own computer at home. And you'll see these quick sheets. They have some really nice sort of pictures, really, really clear instructions so that you can kind of follow your way through. You're welcome to print any of these that you find helpful. And I do recommend you spend a little bit of time looking at the resources here. ULearn Connect, using split screen, accessing the virtual classroom, and understanding my transcript. Going back to that tools and resources page, the other section in here that you are going to find useful is how to find fillable forms. So when we work on tax returns, in this course, we do the theory first before we use any tax software. When we're doing the theory, we do our tax returns by hand. And for anyone who says, why would we have to do that? You never have to do a tax return by hand. I will tell you, in real life, we use these fillable forms, especially when we're doing adjustments for clients. There are things where we're not going to generate or populate a full tax return. We just need some of the schedules, or we just need some information from a part of one of the schedules. So it is much faster and easier to get that from a fillable form. The other reason to use fillable forms is if you are filling it out by hand, you are definitely learning how the tax return works. And so filling them out by hand, you learn much more by doing that than letting the computer do the work for you. So the first place where you can access your fillable forms is here on ULearn. So it's in Tools and Resources. There's a fillable forms package. It is a zipped package. I do recommend anyone who wants to have it, download it to your computer and unzip those fillable forms. That being said, it's not the only place you can find the fillable forms, so I'm also going to be teaching you as we go through the course other ways of accessing all of those forms. You will need fillable forms to do your homework assignments. You will definitely need fillable forms to do your marked assignments. We're going to talk again a little bit more about the course once we go through the resources so you know what's coming up. But you will 100% be tested on whether or not you can access and use these forms. So this is a good resource. A good place for you to find that resource is under fillable forms. Okay, I'm going to go back one slide. Are there any questions about the tools and resources section before I go on? Oh, everyone's looking all right. Okay, so I'm going to go back one slide. You can go back using your back buttons, or at the top, you're going to find a toolbar here that shows you all of the places you've gone. So I've gone to Communities, Tax Academy, Topics, English. I can just go back one level and say I just want to go back to the main page, the English section, and it'll take me back there again. And this time, I'm going to go into my actual Fundamentals of Income Tax class. When I click on there, you're going to see Welcome, and then you're going to see Virtual Sessions recordings. So if you remember, I did say if you've missed a class, these will be recorded. It takes a few days for the recordings to get posted. There are no recordings currently available because we're actually doing the first recording today. But once the recordings have been posted, if you have missed a class, you will be able to go here into the virtual session recordings. You'll probably see multiple folders once it's set up by province because we do often have province-specific tax things. So in your case, I recommend going to the Manitoba folder once it's set up, and you'll be able to download a video of this class, watch the video of the class, and pick up anything that you missed if you did have to miss a class. Again, if you're going to miss a class, you know in advance you're going to miss a class, you are welcome to send me an email. The other thing is you should all have already received a schedule which tells you what information is what is happening on each day. So bear with me here. I'm going to see if I can find that schedule that I sent to all of you. You are my Monday, Wednesday class. Nope, I did not put it on my USB key. So I'll make sure I have that at the break. But that will tell you each class what we are doing. So today's class will be finishing Chapter 1. The next class that we have will be on Monday. We'll be doing Chapter 2. You are expected to have read both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 before next Monday, and you have to do all of the exercises in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 and the Chapter 2 review problem. We will be taking up the answers together. So the idea is you do the work in advance, and then you come to class already prepared. I will spend 3 hours talking about all the little details that you've already read in your textbook, and then we'll be reviewing the chapter review problems at the end. Okay, and then a few more things. I'm going to go back now to the community section, all the way back to the beginning. The other section which you might find very helpful is the Inkling section. Inkling is where we access our textbooks. And so Inkling here, if we go into topics, if you're having any questions about how to access Inkling, how to use Inkling, how to search things in Inkling, All of that information is here, and there are some videos, there are some frequently asked questions, how to access that. And Inkling, again, is where we do our textbooks. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my Inkling over now. If you have Inkling, log into Inkling, and you can follow along with what we're doing. When you log into Inkling, you're going to see a screen that looks something like this. Again, I'm going to have more books in my library than you have in yours. If you're wondering, I have taken almost all of the courses on this list, so I have quite a few, and I'm going to show you some things to help you out there. Before I do that, we're going to do one more quick poll just to see how everyone has done. So we've had, you had a welcome email, hopefully, that gave you some information for things that you're supposed to do before today's class, and make sure you're in Inkling. I just want to see how we're all doing with that. So I'm going to pull up my poll here, and let's just do, I'm going to give 2 minutes on this poll. I'm going to open up the poll. You should now have on your screen a poll that's going to ask you which of these statements is true. So pick all of the correct ones. The first one is, I received the welcome email with the class schedule. The second one is, I did not receive the email with the class schedule. If you didn't, I'm going to try to send it to you. Then you have, I have completed the How to Succeed in the Virtual Classroom training in ULearn. Or if you haven't done that yet, I'd like to know, because if you're having problems with it, I can help. Then there's, I have completed the Learner Guide training. If you have, mark that. If you haven't, let me know. And finally, I have logged into Inkling, and I can access things. I know how to find my textbook, or either I haven't logged into Inkling yet, or I don't know how to find my textbook. Okay, so we've got 6 people answered, 5 people in progress, or 6 people haven't started, 3 in progress, 11 finished. Good. Once you have your answers locked in, hit the submit button so that they register. And we'll look at the results together. I'll be using this information to make sure that we're helping anyone who's having difficulty accessing things. I want to make sure you all have access to your resources as soon as possible, because you do need time to go through the materials in this class. So if you're struggling in any way to get access to the materials or to find your way around things, we're going to use this weekend and early next week to get you all caught up. Okay, I've got 5 people I'm waiting for, except I think some of those people are the same person. So should be good. All right, I'm going to close the poll and let's just see how we're doing. Take a look at the results. All right, most of you have received the welcome. If you haven't received the welcome email, I'll look into that by the end of class today. A couple people have not completed the How to Succeed in the Virtual Classroom training. Please do. I can't confirm this yet, but I'm pretty sure the way it was set up last year is you would have had to have completed that and your learner's guide before you will have access to any of your assignments. And so it is necessary for you to finish those, or you won't be able to access your assignments. If you can't access them, you can't submit them. So it is really, really critical. If you haven't done that yet, make sure that you do. If you're not sure how to do that, let me go back very quickly to my ULearn. The place you're going to go to find that is in your transcript. So if you go down to where it says My Transcript, you can click on In Progress. Again, I may have different things than you have, but you're going to find the one that says Level 1 Training, Open Curriculum. And when you open your curriculum, you'll see 2 little tabs, How to Succeed in a Virtual Classroom. And you can launch the training, go through the training, and when it's done, it will be marked with a little green check mark to say that it's complete. And you'll have a learner guide. When you've done the learner guide, launch the training, watch all the training. When it's done, you'll mark it complete, and you want to see a green check mark. So if you're not sure if you finished it or you haven't finished it, go back into your training and look for those green check marks. If you've got green check marks on both of them, you won't have any problems accessing your assignments. If you don't have green check marks, send me a screenshot when you get to it, email me a screenshot, and I'll see if I can troubleshoot and help you get into what you need. Okay, so switching back then to Inkling, I'm going to start with Inkling. For the few people who are not logged into or haven't found their textbook in Inkling, don't worry about it yet, but do send me an email today, or I will probably email you directly anyway because I'll have your results on the poll, and we're going to make sure that you get access to it so you have that resource today. Okay, when you're in Inkling, it's kind of like a library. So you have a whole selection of books to choose from. And those books are going to be different colors. Some of them will be green, some will be dark green. In my case, I have blue ones that I can't read because they're all in French. I have purple ones, which for me are corporate tax. I have some brownie green ones for US tax training, which is not a course that I've taken, but these purple ones I have. And what you can do if you have a lot of things on here and you only want to see a few, is you can pick a little star. So I'm going to choose the little orange star for Fundamentals of Income Tax Level. And I picked out a few other books as well that I think are useful. And if you have selected the ones you want, you can just click on the star at the top of your toolbar here on the right side, and that's going to pull out just the books you want to use all the time. So my books right now, I have the business one from the year before because I haven't updated it yet. I've got capital gains. I have cryptocurrencies. I do cryptocurrency traders. I have a residency book. And of course, the most important ones for this course, the ones you should have at your fingertips. Facts and figures, very important. Fundamentals of income tax, very important. Manitoba supplement, very important. We're definitely going to be using that. And then the Tax Academy reference. So if you are in there, you're welcome to open it. If not, you can watch on my screen. And we're going to start with the Tax Academy reference book. Okay, and what I would like to know, I'm going to pull up on the side here. When you open a book, you just click on it. On the left hand, you're going to have your table of contents for your book. And on the right main part of the screen, you're going to actually see the pages. You can go from page to page by going down to the bottom arrow and going to the next page, or you can just jump to the part of the book that you want to be on. So for example, if I want to go to the first sort of useful page of the book, I'm going to go to the one that says Federal Income Tax and Benefit Returns. So this is in the tab on the side. You can close this tab if you want to, so you can click the red and that makes your screen bigger. And then if you want to get your table of contents back, you're just going to click on that arrow button at the top that says Table of Contents, and it will come back on your screen. If I go to Federal Income Tax and Benefits Return, can someone in the chat window or everyone in the chat window tell me what am I looking at in this book? What does this textbook have in it that might be a useful resource for me? If you have your chat window, pull your chat window out. We have schedules. We have the paper form for the taxes. So remember all those fillable forms that you can download and you have to unzip them on your computer? If you just want to very quickly look at a tax return, this one you can't fill in, but if you want to print it out, you can print it out. But if you just need to really, really quickly look at a tax return, everything you need for a tax return in Canada is here. Okay. And the main one that we do, we're not going to do the Quebec only. You're going to find the one that says Alberta, Manitoba, and so on. This is most of the country has the same tax return. Of course, Quebec has to be a little bit different, so they have their own extra lines. But if we're going to be filling out tax returns, if you just need to look something up on a tax return, this is a really nice resource to do that. Or, for example, if you're working on an assignment or an exam, and you want to have a paper copy of a tax return to look at, you can come to this textbook to do it. Or if you want to, you can also print. So in order to print things from Inkling, you're going to notice at the top of the page that you're on is a little print icon. You can do the drop down, and you can either print it to a printer that's connected to your computer if you have one, or if you just want to save a copy on your computer somewhere, you can also save this as a PDF, and then you can save it to a file on your desktop. I will say it might depend what browser you're in. I know I use Firefox often at home, and the Firefox print function with Inkling is sometimes a little fussy. So if you're finding that print icon isn't there or isn't working, try loading it in a different browser. I'm using Google Chrome at the moment, and Google Chrome has never had any problems printing for me, so that's the one I use if I want to print specific pages out of an Inkling textbook. Okay, so we have the tax return at the top, and then we have all kinds of schedules. Don't worry, they look really intimidating now. By the end of this course, you're going to be amazed at how not stressful you find this, because we're going to be using them quite a bit. And again, because we're using paper forms, fillable forms for the beginning of the course, you really do get very comfortable with the return. Right now, all our tax returns are for 2021. That's because the government hasn't updated the tax return for 2022 yet. So for this course, we're going to learn how to do tax returns for the 2021 tax year. And then if you end up working for H&R Block, you will have the option in January or February of doing an update course where we will find out any of the new rules for the new tax season, because of course, taxes are fluid and they change all the time. So we will update our forms in the new year once the government has posted the new forms. Okay, now I'm going to go back. So to go back, you click on that top button again. And just in case I did that too fast, because sometimes I forget that I'm very used to this program, I use it all the time, I'll show you how to do that. If you're in your textbook and you want to go back to the bookshelf, you're going to click on the little bookshelf picture that says My Library. When you hover over it, it says My Library. Click on My Library, go back. And this time, I would like everyone to find the textbook. So the textbook here is Fundamentals of Income Tax Level 1. Open that up and see if you can find the first page. And if you have that open, can you give me a green check mark? If you don't have it open, give me a red X in your participants window. I have been talking for a while, so let's see how many people are still following along. Okay, I've got a couple of green check marks, missing a few more. Give everyone a chance. Great. Okay, and Saskia, if you haven't got Inkling set up yet, again, we'll make sure we check in with you when we have our first break, see if we can get access to that for you. For now, follow along with what I have on my screen. Okay, but I've still got a few people. So Xiao Ying, see if you can get it there. Your page is a different date, December 3rd, 2021. Document is current. Make sure you're in the 2022 Fundamentals of Income Tax. If you have a previous year, it will be updated in a different year. So make sure you're in Fundamentals of Income Tax 2022. Okay, and I'm waiting for Kulwinder, Elshan. If you're not able to get into this, give me a red X so that I know that you're having problems. All right, you've got it fixed. Great. Okay, so I want you to notice what we have in our textbook. You're going to get very comfortable with this. There are a lot of resources and a lot of really useful things as well. One of the most important pages that I want to bring your attention to is the first one that we're on, which is clarifications and corrections. So this is a very large textbook with a lot of detail in it, and it is updated and prepared fresh every year. We have to update the books every year and change. As tax changes, we change the material we teach. So errors will happen. There may be typos. There may be something that didn't get updated from the previous year. And that means that this book will constantly be being amended or updated. If you are the kind of person who likes to have printed copies and you print every single page of this textbook out, you might find that what you have printed out is different than what we have, because as there are any changes or corrections to the book, they will be posted here. So if you are working off of a printed or downloaded copy, not the live one on Inkling, if you're using the live one on Inkling, it will always update. It will be the most accurate, and everything will be correct to the date that we're working from. But if you're working from a downloaded version or you're working from a paper version, when you do go in to check things, you should check to see if there has been any changes to that so that you can update your own materials and make sure that you don't end up missing some of those corrections. So you can see right now we've already had two very quick little changes where they have corrected a typo. Line 111 should have said line 119. And then there was a solution to a correction to a solution as well. That's already happened. This is going to get longer as we go. And then you're going to notice we have the welcome to this course. And we have about this course. So I'm going to switch down to the about this course. The course is broken down into multiple chapters. We have 1 to 5 is the basic tax return, how to start from the beginning of the tax return all the way to the last page. Right now, tax returns in Canada are 8 pages long. When I first took this course, they were 4 pages long. So things do change, but we're going to get you through the first 8 pages, generally speaking. Then we start to make things a bit more complicated. We add complexity. We add families. We add different types of income. We add different types of deductions. We're going to start to add all of that information in the theory from chapter 6 to 13. Chapter 14 will be doing provincial specific. So for everyone in this course, that should be Manitoba. If you need to know about a province other than Manitoba, please email me and let me know. But if you're planning on doing returns based in Manitoba, I will be focusing on that for this course. Then we have some administrative topics, which is how we deal with the CRA. That's both how to file the return and what happens after we file the return. At that point, you will have a theory exam. After you've finished the theory exam, we're going to then switch gears and switch into the tax preparation software. Once you know how to do a tax return on paper and in theory, we're going to teach you how to do it using our tax preparation software. So those will be chapters 16 to 23. You'll probably notice that those chapters do not currently exist in your book. They will be added later. So for now, we just have the first 15 chapters in the book, and the remaining chapters will be posted later. Okay. Course materials we've already talked about. You're going to have your fundamentals of income tax. You'll have your facts and figures. We haven't looked at that, but I do recommend over the weekend that you sort of poke around what you have, look at your resources, and see what is in there. Anytime there's something very useful in there, I promise I will refer to it, and I will be suggesting some pages you might want to highlight. There will be a provincial supplement for your province or territory. We actually have all of the provinces and territories available, but we'll be working with Manitoba for this class. And then there is your fillable forms package, which is your tax reference. So your tax reference guide will have all of the fillable forms for you. And you have in ULearn the fillable forms package that you can download. Okay. The rest of this section is going to show you some useful ways that things are organized in Inkling. So you'll notice that you have some text box that will have some interesting facts. You're going to have text in between lines, and then you're going to have some overviews. There will be some boxes that will say this is out of the scope of the course. Here's an interesting fact, but we're not going to test you on it. Or here's something you might come across. If you come across that, you need to go find someone who is more senior in tax than you because that's beyond the scope of this course. If you noticed at the beginning of my textbooks in Inkling, there is a lot more tax than just what we cover in this course, but I promise you, you're going to find this course has enough information, and I don't think you're going to want even more data than what we give you. I apologize in advance. It is a lot. This course is a lot of work, but if you put the work in, if you have done the readings and you've done the homework, I promise you I will do everything I can to make this successful for you. So your job is to keep up, and my job is to be here as a resource for you. Okay. There are also things you can do. I'm going to go down here. There are annotations and notes. I want to show you some of that. This year, there are a few other things that we haven't had in previous years. So if you're a prior student or you've worked with an H&R Block Tax Academy course before, some of this is going to look new. You're going to have a little box where you can click the arrows to the right and to the left. And you'll notice that because you're going to have these little circles at the bottom. Anywhere where you have these little circles, it means that there are more pages for you to look at. And we also have some videos embedded into our Inkling for you to watch. So make sure as you're going through your text that you are clicking on everything that can be clicked on, just to make sure you're not missing anything. And then we do also have some links. So sometimes you'll have something that will link you to a different site. It might take you to a CRA webpage. We try to keep the links as up-to-date as possible, but of course, if we're linking to an external page, we can't guarantee that that page won't change. The CRA has a habit of changing how to search for things. So I will also be teaching you in this course how to find things directly on the CRA website, because if you can't find it through the link, you will be able to find it by searching using the CRA as a resource as well. Okay, and then there's a few more things that I want to talk about: assignments, homework, self-tests, all of that. Let's talk about the course itself. So in this course, you are going to have 4 elements that create your grade. There will be an assignment number 1. Assignment number 1 is 15% of your final grade. You will be doing the assignment on paper first, and so you'll find the assignment in your textbook. You'll do the fillable forms, you'll download the fillable forms, complete the assignment in full, and then you'll be going into ULearn, launching a quiz. That quiz will be a certain number of questions. I'll let you know closer to the time how many questions it's going to be, based on the work you've already done. It is a timed test, and you only get to take it once. So please don't go into it, like don't launch any assignments or any theory exams until you are ready to write them. If you launch the exam and you didn't mean to, you're going to have to just try to answer the questions the best you can. We cannot unlock them and give you a second attempt. So if you see something on your ULearn that says assignment, don't click on it until we've had a chance to talk in class about how to do it and how to click on it. Make sure you've done things in advance. If you have any questions, send me an email before you click on it, because again, once you launch that assignment, I cannot unlock it for you. It is timed and you get 1 attempt, and that is going to be part of your mark. Okay. Assignment 1 is 15%. Assignment 2 will come later, also 15% of your grade. Once you finish both assignments and Chapter 15, there will be a theory exam. That theory exam will be on ULearn as well. All of these are multiple choice or short answer. Short answer means like filling in a number. So it'll say what number is on line whatever, and you type the number in the box. And then after that, we will do the TPS part of the course, and then there will be a TPS exam, TPS meaning tax preparation software. Okay. Are there any questions about the grading, about the assignments, how all of that works? Thank you for bearing with me this morning. I know we're going to start with a whole lot of information and me talking at you. No, if you do come up with questions, I will be mentioning things as we come closer to the assignments. I will be talking about what to do and how to do them. There are also 5 self-tests in this course, and they come periodically through. So I'm going to show you what a self-test might look like. And while I do that, I'm going to show you how to use the search box, because that's the easiest way for me to find the self-test. So if you go over to the left-hand side of your screen in your table of contents and you want to find a specific thing in the book, you're going to notice that you have a search function. And it looks like a little magnifying glass. If you click on the search function, you can type in anything you're looking for. So in this case, I'm looking for self-tests. I'm going to type in self-test. I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to take me to every place where there is a self-test in the textbook. So if I go to self-test 1, I can see that it is located at the end of Chapter 3. And I'm just going to take the answers off for you so you can't see them. And what we are going to be doing is at the end of some of the chapters, I believe it's Chapter 3, Chapter 5, there's a few other ones as well, there is an option to test your own knowledge. These are not graded, they are not marked. We will be taking them up in class. We'll be doing some polls to take them up at the beginning of the next class. And that's going to give us the idea of how well are you doing. Are there things you're understanding, or are there things that you're struggling with? If there's something that you're not really getting and you've done the self-test and you're not sure on a topic, that would be a good time in class or by email to let me know. I need some more help with, or can you please review, or I'm still a little bit confused about. Any of those types of questions are welcome so that you have a chance to practice before you get to anything that is actually graded. So there will be 2 self-tests completed minimum before we get to our first assignment, and we're going to keep having those resources available to you in the course. They are not graded, but they're just for your own knowledge. Okay, so that's the course. In order to pass the course, you need 70%. If you're interested in working for H&R Block in the future as a tax pro, you would need 80% to pass the course and be eligible to work for us. There will not be any extensions for the assignments or the exams. I can't give you extensions, unfortunately, because the day after it is due is the day we'll be taking up the answers in class. And once the answers have been taken up in class and posted on the recordings, they will not, obviously you will not then be able to submit for marks. So if you do have something that comes up and you have a problem and you need to talk to me, do send me an email. But generally speaking, we are not able to give extensions. You will, however, have a lot of time. So you're going to have warning beforehand. You can plan your schedule accordingly. You can kind of figure out what's going to work for you. If you know you're going to have a really hectic week or you're going to be away, make sure that you plan around that. And again, you all should have a schedule that has all of the chapters, what we're doing on each day, and all of the deadlines so that you can keep track of your own work as well. So just generally speaking, how to be successful in this course, come to class. Coming to class is the best thing you can do because you can ask me questions. Anything specific that you need to know, you can ask. Read the assigned chapters. You should read them before we do them in class. I don't have time in 3 hours to read the textbook to you. I will not be covering 100% of material in textbook. I can't. It's too large a textbook. What I'm going to be doing is highlighting the important things, helping you to organize it, giving you extra examples, giving you extra practice. But the understanding is that you have already read the material ahead of time. So please do your readings in advance and do all of the homework, do all of the problems. Do not leave it to the last, like the day before the exam and think I'll catch up later. There is too much work in this course. It is a very intense course. The expectation is for every hour of class time you have about the same amount in homework or reading. So plan your weeks accordingly. I will be letting you know 2 classes in advance what you need to be doing. Okay, so I'm just going to stop sharing my monitor for a moment, and you can see on my whiteboard. For next class, you should complete Chapter 1, read Chapter 2, complete all the exercises and the chapter review problems for Chapter 2. And then for Wednesday's class of the week after that, read Chapter 3 and complete all exercises in the Chapter 3 review. So between the schedule that you have and my notes, you will know what you need to get done every week, and then you can plan. So if you have busy weekends and more time in the middle of the week, you can work ahead. If you have really busy weeks and a lot more time on the weekend, again, you can make sure you have the time to do the work that you need to do. Recordings will be posted approximately 3 to 4 days after the live class. And something new that we're doing this year, we're also going to be sending you copies of the PowerPoint slides, and we'll be sending you those at the end of every class so that if you have missed a class or if you just like having those PowerPoints to look at and to print and download, you'll have those available to you. I should let you know I do add material to my classes, so I may have some extra exercises or assignments or sort of helpful things. Those extra slides will not be in the PowerPoint. It's just the basic slides for the course. But again, my class is the one being recorded, so if you have missed something and there was an exercise that you really liked, you'll be able to see it in the recording. And honestly, you have enough material. You won't need extra slides anyway. Between what's in the textbook and what you have, you should have what you need. And then the last thing that I'll say is when we do chapter review problems, those are fairly significant problems. They are a lot of work. I will not be sending answers to the chapter review problems. We will be taking them up in class, so you will see the answers and we will do them together as a class. It means you'll be able to see them on the recordings. It also means if you really, really want to know the answer and you've done it and you want the answer for your own notes, the way to get that is to send me an email with your answer. If you send me your completed chapter review problem, I will look at your review problem and I will either write back and say you did it exactly correctly, good job, in which case you have an answer, or I will tell you what you did wrong, in which case you will correct it, and you can continue to do that as many times as needed until you get it right. I don't find it helpful to give students the answers for you to study off of. I find it helpful for students to do the work and continue to do the work until they get it right, and then you really will know it. So that is my policy. If you want chapter review answers, you have to send me your chapter review problem. Okay, my email is on the screen right now. We're going to take a break now. It is 10:03. We're going to take a break until 10:13. Then we're going to come back refreshed, and we're actually going to jump into chapter 1 today. So if you have any questions, any problems, type in the chat window. I will stick around for this break and get up, stretch, and we'll come back at 10:13. All right. Welcome back from break. I'm going to ask everyone who is back from break to give me a green check mark if you are back. Or you can give me a happy face or a frowny face or a I need coffee, just so that I know you're here. I want to make sure we get most of everyone back. Okay, I'm seeing a few. All right, Brittany, I think I am learning from you that you are a coffee drinker. I approve, and yet I will continue to not have coffee because, as I say, I know I already talk very fast, and that would not go well for this class if I added some caffeine to the fuel. Okay, it looks like most of everyone is back. So what we're going to do for the rest of class today is we're actually going to start with the chapter 1. I know most of you have not read chapter 1. That's fine. Chapter 1 is a little more sort of history and just general knowledge. However, there are a few really critical things. So as we get into it, I'm also going to be showing you a few things in Inkling, how you can make some notes and flag some pages, because some of those are going to be useful. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to share my screen and try to do this as smoothly as possible. I promise I will get better. It just takes a week or two of practice for me to get really comfortable with my tools again. And as I do that, we're going to go into our agenda here. So again, for those of you who are new and getting used to this yourself, every time the screen jumps around and you can now see my Fundamentals of Income Tax course. I'm going to jump ahead to where we want to be, which is the agenda. You can hover your mouse over the top. You're going to see a toolbar drop down from the top there. Pull out your participants window and your chat window. Those are the two that I want you to have. When you have those ones pulled out to the side, you will be able to participate with the chat in class as well. And if I have any questions that need yes or no answers, you'll be able to do that with the participant window. All right, what we are doing for the rest of today, we're going to be talking about Canadian income taxes broadly. We're going to start to talk about what income is. So for a lot of people, some people in this class may have multiple languages. Tax has a lot of terms and definitions, and even words where in English you might know what they mean generally out in the world, they may have more specific tax meanings. So we're going to define some of those terms today. We're going to talk about what a tax return looks like. We're going to talk about how tax returns get filed, and then we're going to talk about what happens at the end. Once you have filed a return, what do you get from the CRA? That is the goal, to get through all of that today. At the conclusion of this chapter, you can explain the evolution of income tax from the beginnings until today. Again, there's a really neat video in Inkling which kind of walks you through what's happened. So I recommend, if you have time, go through that and take a look. I'm going to go quickly through that slide. And we're also going to talk about who has to file a return, who should file a tax return. Even if they don't have to, why would they want to file a tax return? And of course, not everyone is always required to file a tax return, so we'll talk about that as well. We're going to talk about what income needs to be taxed, so what income shows up on your tax return as taxable. We're going to talk about 3 different types of income on the return: total, net, and taxable. Talk about due dates. We're going to talk about online tools with the CRA, because the CRA is trying to move as much online and electronic as possible. It's trying to move away from paper returns. But let's start at the very beginning, which is taxes in Canada. So for those of you who know, Canada was confederated in 1867, and at that time, pretty much the only thing that created tax were goods and services, mostly goods coming into the country and goods leaving the country. So whenever things were brought into the country, a tax would be paid. When things were taken out of the country, a tax would be paid. But generally speaking, the money that was earned inside the country in Canada was not taxed at that time. That changed when we hit World War I, because World War I was very expensive for the Canadian government, and they had to find a way to raise money. So they got this bright idea of taxing the profits of businesses in Canada. It was supposed to be temporary. They were just going to do it for the duration of the war and then stop. But it turns out that the government found it very useful to have income coming in that they could spend on things for the public. And so that then changed to the creation of the Department of National Revenue. We now call it the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, but the initial organization was formed in 1927. And then in World War II, we had a new thing that happened, which is originally taxes would be collected and paid once a year, whereas it started to look like the government would like to have more regular income coming in throughout the year rather than issuing a tax bill and hoping that it could get collected and paid. So starting in World War II, actually in 1942, they developed a system of pay as you earn. And in this case, we got what is very close to what we have today, which is most employers will collect tax off of every paycheck and submit it throughout the year in advance. And then at the end of the year, you do a reconciliation to say, did I pay enough tax? Do I need to pay a little bit more or a little bit less? And that's where we have the system we have today, where we have taxes owing or tax refunds on a tax return. Most of the rules we have that are how tax works in Canada come from the Income Tax Act in 1949. If you're curious and you want to read some very, very detailed, boring legislation, you can look up the Income Tax Act and see what's in it. And then, of course, there are regulations and amendments and adjustments that are made, but the core legislation is based on that 1949 legislation. All right. So one of the questions we've actually already asked is, have you completed a Canadian tax return by yourself, or would you like to complete your own Canadian tax returns by yourself in the future? We sort of did a poll of that. I know a handful of people here have done their own taxes before or have done taxes for other people. And other people, this may be the first time you're doing a tax return. I noticed Brittany says she loves boring legislation. I agree. I actually really enjoy reading it. But you have to have a very specific type of mind to get through the Tax Act, because the Tax Act has a lot of double negatives. It's, this is not a thing unless this, unless this, unless this, and it just keeps flipping back and forth. So it's really, really dense, and it's kind of fun to work through. We are going to be looking at a few other things in the legislation, which is more the regulations, and we're actually going to look at some of that when we talk about medical expenses, is what can you deduct for medical expenses. So everyone's going to have a chance to dip their toe into that. And then from that, I will say, read whatever you're interested in reading. But also, the nice thing about tax returns is, for those of you who want to read the really dense, difficult legislation, it's there. So Brittany, that would be you. For those of you who don't, you will find that the tax return is almost like a set of instructions. As you start at the top of the tax return, theoretically, if you read from the top and you just read very carefully, you will get to the bottom and you will do it correctly. So it will link you to resources, to lines, to worksheets, to schedules, but all of the rules that you need are all included in the tax return itself, so that we don't actually have to go to the legislation to find the answers most of the time. And certainly for everything we're covering in this course, we will not need to go to legislation to find the answers. It will be in the tax return itself. All right, I want to talk a little bit about, sorry, my screen is having a little fun there, Canadian income taxes and how they work today. We have what's called the 4 pillars of Canadian income tax, and this is true for all Canadian tax returns. The first pillar is residency. The second is the self-assessment system. The third is that it is a progressive tax system in Canada. And the fourth is that we have provincial taxes that are all calculated and paid through a single central agency, but every province has their own set of rules as well as the federal rules. So I want to start with the first one, which is residency. Taxes in Canada are paid not based on whether you are a citizen of Canada or your legal status in Canada, so you don't necessarily need to be a permanent resident to have to pay in Canada. You might be a Canadian citizen who doesn't need to pay taxes in Canada. So citizenship is not relevant at all. It just has to do with residency, and residency is where you are. So as an exercise, because I know we often have a lot of people who have experience in different countries, can anyone name some countries where that is not the case? So do you know of a name of a country where you pay taxes based on your citizenship, not based on your residency? And I'll let a few people answer. So Brittany has said USA. USA is correct. In the United States, if you are a citizen of the United States, you may need to pay, or at the very least file taxes, regardless of where you are living in the world at the time. Karina, Ukraine. That one's interesting. I will look that one up because I actually don't know about the tax system in Ukraine, but I will make a note and look that one up because it does sound interesting. And there are a few countries in the world where that is true. In Canada, it is not true. What matters is what is your residency. And then, of course, we have the question of how do we determine what residency means. So for this, I'm going to stop my slideshow briefly, and I'm going to go to my textbook. So if I go to my textbook and I go to Chapter 1, let me find my Chapter 1 here. I'm going to find illustration 1.1, and if you can, I really, really highly recommend that you find a way of noting this page. So if you like having paper, this is a really good page to print out. If you want to put notes on it, or you want to have a note, you can highlight things. So I would highlight, for example, this paragraph. So I'm just going to put my cursor on it and drag. And then I have the option of saying highlight or add a note. And if I want to just highlight it, I can click on that and it's going to turn yellow. You'll find sometimes the highlight's a little fuzzy and it highlights one or two words that you didn't want, or not quite as many words as you want, just to kind of play around with it. If you want to take the highlight away, you just click on it again and choose remove highlight. But if I choose highlight here and I want to add a note, the note might be, this is a useful page about residency, and then I'm going to save it. And the really neat thing about having this online book is anytime I need to find something very quickly, I want to find my important pages or my notes, I can go here onto my toolbar on the left and I can choose Notebook. And if I choose Notebook, it's going to pull all of the notes that I've made anywhere in my textbook, in any place. And if I want to find it really quickly, I go Canadian income taxes, useful page about residency, that's the one I want, and it will take me to that page. So if I'm on a different page, I'm going to go find a different spot. I'm going to click over here, take that answer away for you. I'm going to go here and I want to find that note. It's going to take me right to that note so that I can find the page that I'm looking for really, really quickly. Okay. So why is this page so important? Well, the question of what is your residence is on this page, and this is directly from the CRA. This is from an information bulletin. Again, those of you who want to read more about it, there is an interpretation bulletin IT 221R3. You can look that up if you want to, but you don't need to because the answer of what you need is right here. We have to determine your residency for two reasons. One is to determine whether you're filing as a resident of Canada. For the purposes of this course, that's beyond what we're going to do. We're going to assume every person you have in this course is resident in Canada. Once we start dealing with people who are leaving the country or coming into the country, taxes can get a little more complicated. We have 2 other advanced courses on that topic, so we're not going to get into those details. But the rule for whether you're resident in Canada for tax purposes or which province you're resident in are basically the same. So you do need to know what province someone is resident in so that you know which provincial forms you should be using. especially for those of you who are in Manitoba but are going to be working in places close to a border. So again, when I was in Brandon, it was very important to know tax residency rules because in Brandon, our offices were often the closest office for a lot of people from Saskatchewan. So we would have some clients come in to file returns who were Manitoba residents and some clients coming in to file returns who were Saskatchewan residents. And we had to be able to determine the answer because they wouldn't necessarily know. So how do you know what province you are a resident of? Well, the first test is the most important one. Where is your dwelling? And a dwelling means the home that you live in. It has to be a home that you have some ties to. Either you own it or you rent it. Okay, so that is the first test. If that is the answer, if you have one home and it is in one province, then that is the province you're going to be filing your taxes for. It gets more complicated if you have more than one dwelling or if you have no dwellings. So for example, you might have a property that you own in Manitoba and you might have a vacation property that you also live in British Columbia. So in that case, you have two possible homes and you live in both of them at some point in the year. Now you have two dwellings. We have to go to the second stage of the test, which is where is your spouse or common law partner? If you don't have a spouse or common law partner, and we're going to define what a spouse is for tax purposes and what a common law partner is for tax purposes later in the course, but for now we'll just use the regularly understood if you married someone or if you live and are in a relationship with someone, and then we'll drill down on the details later. So if you have a spouse or a common law partner and you own two homes or you have two dwellings, then the location of your spouse or common law partner will determine your province of residence. And if that doesn't answer the question, where are your children? So where's your spouse and where are your kids? If that doesn't answer it, then we have to go to the third step, which is the fuzzy things, where we get into where are you employed, where's your health care, where's your driver's license, where are your bank accounts, where's your stuff, where are you spending most of your time and doing most of your things. But that test we only need to look at if we can't answer the first two. Okay, we're going to practice this. So I'm going to use the chat window again. Can someone tell me what is the situation of someone who does not have any dwelling? Can you think of a person who lives in Canada but does not have a dwelling that would determine their residency? It means you don't rent and you don't own a property. Who are the people in Canada that that would apply to? There are lots of them. We get them every year. Young people for sure, students, especially university students, might be living with their parents. Or what if they're in student housing? If you're in student housing, do you have a right to live in that house if you stop being a student? No. If you can get kicked out of your dwelling by your employer or by your school, then that is not a strong enough tie to count as your house, because you only have that place because of your status as a student. And so there are lots of students in the country who, if they're only living in student housing, will not have established a dwelling. If you have no dwelling, then we have to go to the next test, which is a spouse or common law partner. Maybe they don't have that. Maybe they don't have children. Maybe they do have health care and driver's licenses, so that will answer it for it. But I will give you another example. What about someone who really doesn't have anything? They've graduated from high school. They're taking 3 years off to travel across the country and couch surf with friends and spend some time with relatives and stay in Airbnbs all over the country and just find themselves. How do we figure out which residence they're going to be? Maybe they don't have a driver's license. How do we know where their province of residence will be? Well, if you can't come up with any answer, it's going to be wherever you were last a resident, which is probably the province they grew up in. Okay, keep this page, keep this Inkling page open if you have it. I would like for everyone to practice this a little bit. So let's see if we can come up with how this works. So remember, test 1 is dwelling. If you can answer the question, that's the answer. If you have a dwelling in one place, if you're renting, if you're owning, you have a dwelling, and there's only one of them, that's where you're going to be resident for tax purposes. If you can't answer that question because you have no dwelling or you have 2 dwellings, go to the spouse and kids. If spouse and kids doesn't answer it, go to the ties, the extra things. Let's try this out. So we're going to do a little activity here. And I'm going to do some annotating here. So you should, very briefly, as soon as I do this, allow everyone to annotate. You should now have a little annotation toolbar that you can use. Try not to use yellow. If it's yellow, change it. We have Sally. Sally's from Regina, Saskatchewan. She's 20 years old. For the past 2 years, she's been going to university in Calgary. That's in Alberta, where she shares an apartment with her boyfriend and works in the summer. However, she returns to Regina each Christmas and is always there on December 31st. So I did not mention, and I should have, what we want to know on a tax return is where was your residence at the end of the year, not at the beginning of the year or the middle of the year. Where was your residence on December 31st? Okay, so she goes to university in Calgary. She has an apartment with her boyfriend. She works in the summer. She goes back to Regina for Christmas to spend with her family. What province is she a resident of on December 31st? And everyone can decide if they think it is Saskatchewan or Alberta. Got a bunch of people saying Alberta. And I have a Saskatchewan, and I have a couple of Saskatchewans. This is why I do this all the time. All right, we're going to go down the test together. What is her dwelling? She is sharing an apartment with her boyfriend, probably renting with her boyfriend. If she's renting with her boyfriend, her dwelling is in Calgary. Does she have a dwelling in Regina? No. Her parents could kick her out if they don't like her. They could say, don't come home this summer or this Christmas. So her dwelling in is Alberta. If her dwelling is in Alberta, what is her residency for tax purposes? Alberta. Does it matter that she's not physically in Alberta on December 31st? No. We can vacation over the holidays if we want to. It does not change our tax residency. If it did change our tax residency, what would be the #1 tourist destination in Canada? If your physical location determined what province you paid tax to, where would we all go visit, do you think, if we could pick anywhere in Canada to go? Anyone who knows anything about other provinces' tax situations? Alberta or the Northwest Territories? I would go up north so that I could get northern residence deductions and all kinds of good things, or I would go to Alberta, which has the lowest tax rate. We would all all the flights would go to Alberta if that made a difference. It doesn't. It has to do with where our dwelling is. All right, Edwin says, what if she's not renting with her boyfriend and just staying with her boyfriend? That gets complicated. We would need to know how long she was with her boyfriend, because if she's living with her boyfriend for 1 year, she's common law. And then the question is, where's her spouse? And her spouse is in Calgary. And in that case, it would still be Alberta. If she had just moved in with him, you are correct, Edwin. In that case, probably she'd still be resident of Regina until she did something else to change it. So these are the things we have to think about all the time, but that's why we're practicing this, and that is an excellent question. So start with where is her dwelling. Next question is spouse and kids. We might look and see had she changed her driver's license and things like that, but it's possible if she was just living with him and hadn't been living with him for a full year, it gets a little bit fuzzier in that case, and we have to do some really good client interviews to find out. All right, let's try another one. Okay, and do the annotation tools again. You should be able to annotate now. We have James. James is from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's 21 years old. For the past 4 years, he's been going to university in Vancouver. He lives in student housing during the school year. For summer holidays, he flies back to Winnipeg to spend time with his family. He's always in Manitoba on December 31st. In order to help pay for school, he works in Winnipeg each summer. What province is he a resident of on December 31st? Probably. Right, I've got some votes for Manitoba. Got lots more votes for Manitoba. I agree with you. Manitoba, because it's student housing, it doesn't count as an established dwelling, because if he flunks out, they're going to make him leave. This is a fun one because even if he was a graduate student and he didn't come home for the summers, as long as he's still in student housing, he's still going to be a resident of Manitoba until he does something else to change it. Okay, but in this case, doesn't really have a dwelling in either place, doesn't have a spouse or kids. So then we go to the rest of the questions. Where are the rest of his ties? And if that doesn't answer the question, then where was he last resident? And that's Manitoba. So in this case, we would be filing him as a Manitoba resident. Good. Let me make them even more interesting. I'm going to do two more. Now, these ones are what I would call challenge questions. So let's see if we can get these ones as well. John and Elsie's home is in Ottawa, where they live from April to October, but they spend their winters at their condo in Victoria, BC. So they own a home in Ottawa and they own a condo in Victoria. Are John and Elsie residents of Ontario on December 31st, or are they residents of British Columbia on December 31st? So they decided Ottawa winters are not their favorite things. They are headed off to Victoria for a good part of the year. So think of the test again. We start with dwelling, and that doesn't answer it for us because they have a dwelling in both places, Ontario and BC. The next question is, where's their spouse? Well, their spouse is in both places with them. So that doesn't answer the question. So now we have to think about their ties. In this case, where do you think their driver's licenses will be? Where do you think most of their bank accounts will be? Where do you think their insurance will be, their health care? Probably Ontario. And so all of those ties will be Ontario ties. They will be resident in Ontario. Even though they're physically in British Columbia at the end of the year, they will still be Ontario residents for tax purposes. The reason I mention this one is if we changed Victoria, BC to, say, Florida, we have a very common type of taxpayer called a snowbird. We have lots of people who spend 5, sometimes even 6 months in a different country where it's warmer, and then the rest of the time here. And this, again, going out of the country is outside the scope of this course, but again, this shows us tax residency is the thing that matters. And so even if they're spending half the year, say, in Florida and half the year here, because their ties are in Canada, not their citizenship necessarily, although that factors in when we get to that last step, but because their ties are in Canada, they'll be residents of Canada, and they'll have to file Canadian tax returns on all of their income. And Brittany says being a snowbird is your only life aspiration. Guessing you're not a fan of the Manitoba winters then. I actually enjoy Manitoba winters more than my winters when I lived in Toronto. I like the winters here better, mostly because people prepare for them. So in this case, the correct answer is they are resident of Ontario, even though they're physically in BC, in a place they own in BC. Their ties are in Ontario, so we'll be filing Ontario tax returns. All right, I have one more, and this is really hard. So if you don't get this one, that's okay. We're just stretching the boundaries of the rules to see if we can think about what we would get if we had a client, because your client's not going to come in and say, my tax residency is this. Your client's going to come in and say, I want to file a tax return, and you have to find out about their life. So here we go. In July, Sandra and her common law husband moved to Montreal, where he will be working for 1 year. However, she doesn't speak French, so from September to December, she spends 4 days each week in Toronto, where she teaches tax at H&R Block. She spends the rest of the week in Montreal, and then for the last week of December, both she and her spouse stay in Ontario, to spend the holidays with their families. Which province is Sandra likely a resident of on December 31st? Sorry, I noticed there's a typo there. Okay, 4 days in Ontario, 3 days in Quebec. What are the important questions to ask? Where is her dwelling? So you're going to ask, are you on the lease in Montreal? And then you're going to say, if you don't know the answer to that, where is her spouse? And in this case, her spouse is vacationing in Ontario, but living in Quebec. So the answer should be Quebec. And if you're wondering, yes, this was me. So this is a real world experience. My now husband, then partner, moved to Quebec for 1 year, and I decided to go with him, but I wanted to keep working, and I cannot teach tax in French. And so I commuted. I took the train. And in this case, we both had to file Quebec returns, which was extra fun because, as those of you who've dealt with Quebec or been in Quebec, it's almost like being in a different country. They have their own system. Everyone else we deal with through the CRA, but Quebec has its own revenue agency and its own tax forms. So in this case, even though more time is being spent in Ontario, and they're both in Ontario December 31st, the dwelling, I was on the lease, so my dwelling answered it. My dwelling was in Montreal, so my residency was Montreal. But even if I hadn't been on the lease, my spouse was in Montreal, and that answers the question. Are there any questions about establishing tax residency? Why it's important to do? We're going to talk more about this. We're going to come back and try it again when we're doing moving expenses, because you can't claim moving expenses until you establish if you have moved, and part of moving might be changing provinces. So we have to know when you actually move by changing your residence from one location to a different one. So these rules are going to come back again as we go through the course. And you will be able to practice this in your Chapter 1 questions as well. But always remember what we need to know, whether or not we're filing a tax return as a resident of Canada and which province we're filing as a resident of. We come back to the same rules that we found in the textbook. Again, if you're looking for it in the textbook, it's illustration 1-1. All right. Good. So that's the first pillar. Residency is very important. It determines if you pay tax in Canada and also which province you are paying taxes to. Now, it is taxes at the end of the tax year. So what if you had someone who lived and had one dwelling in Manitoba until December 20th, and on December 20th they move to Alberta? So they've left their house, they've leased a new house in Alberta, they've moved into that house in Alberta. What will their tax residency be? What province will they be resident in? Alberta. Good. Now, their employer will have been deducting taxes off at a provincial rate all year. Are the taxes in the province higher in Manitoba or in Alberta? Who has the higher tax brackets? Manitoba does. And we're going to look at these. If you don't know the answer to this, that's fine. We're going to get to see some of this. Manitoba has one of the highest tax brackets or highest tax rates of all the provinces in Canada. Alberta has one of the lowest. So in that case, they have been paying tax in advance at a Manitoba rate. When they file their return, they only have to pay tax at an Alberta rate. What's going to happen on their tax return? Will they owe money to the government or will they get a refund? They will get a nice big refund. Wonderful. Good. What if they moved in the other direction? What if they lived in Alberta all year, they worked in Alberta, all their taxes were being deducted at Alberta rates by their employer, and then they move to Manitoba at the very, very end of the year. And Brittany, you have anticipated what happens is sadness and owing a lot of taxes. People moving to Manitoba at the end of the year are pretty much always going to owe taxes. Is it fair? Not really. They lived in Alberta for part of the year, most of the year. However, the government has to have a cutoff. It can't prorate out the taxes over the whole year. That would be way too administratively complicated. So at the end of the day, we need a cutoff. The government has decided the cutoff is December 31st. That is what it is. It all works out in the wash. People move all the time. At the end of the day, across the system, it's fair. For the taxpayer sitting in front of you, it's not going to be good news for them if they have, at the end of the year, moved to a higher tax rate province. But we like to prepare them for that. We warn them that it's going to happen. We walk them through that process, and we let them know as long as they stay in Manitoba, next year their deductions will be taken at the correct rate. We can help them with that. It is important to know that that deadline, December 31st, is the important one. We're going to refresh that again in Chapter 2 when we start looking at the first page of the tax return. Okay, so tax residence we've talked about. Any questions there? Not seeing any hands up. Not seeing any chat. All right, we're going to move on to the second pillar. The second pillar is that in Canada, we have what is called a self-assessment system. That means in Canada, the government does not decide for you how much tax you have to pay. You are responsible for determining how much tax you have to pay, filing a tax return with that information on it, and then paying your taxes. So that's a bit of a funny thing because all the information we put on a tax return, most of the information put on a tax return, especially anything in this course, the government already knows about because your employer has reported all that information. They've reported your income. They've reported your deductions. They've reported the tax withheld. All of that already exists in the CRA. However, the CRA does not file your taxes for you. You have to file a tax return. You have to report all of your income. You have to ask for any deductions that you want to get. And after you do that, you file your tax return, and you either get a refund or you owe some money and you have to pay some additional money. Again, this is not the same everywhere in the world. Can anyone give me, in the chat window, some other countries where they don't do it this way? Countries where the government determines your taxes for you and you just pay whatever you're supposed to pay or get whatever refund you're supposed to get. Germany, I'm not sure. I'd have to look that one up, but definitely there are a number of European countries where that is true. So United Kingdom is one where they determine it for you. And then if you don't like the answer, you can file additional information. And then I know Norway is one country. I know Switzerland is a country that does that. There are lots of countries all over the world. Portugal is another one. I do know that one. I looked that one up last year. So there are lots of places in the world where it is not a self-assessment tax system. The government does the work for you, and you either go, okay, that's great, or if you don't like the answer and you have more deductions you want to claim, you can add that information to the government. Not how it works in Canada. In Canada, you are responsible for filing, and if you don't ask for something, even if the government knows about it, they're not going to give it to you unless you ask for it. So it's a very, very different system. There are also countries that do taxes completely differently, where it's just a flat rate and everybody pays the same. And so that's completely different as well. Here we have multiple different tax rates. We have multiple different deductions. It's all tied to your income. Everyone pays different amounts. So we have a very complicated tax system, and you're going to get really comfortable with it today. The downside of a self-assessment system is if you don't do what you are supposed to do, if you don't file your tax returns, what will the government do? What happens if you needed to file a tax return and you did not file one? There are penalties. You have to pay extra money because you didn't file the tax return, which again, for some of our clients, that seems really strange, considering the fact that The government already has all the information. They know the answer of what you are supposed to pay in taxes for most Canadians. The only Canadians where they don't already know the answer are people who are self-employed. Pretty much everybody else, they already know what your taxes are supposed to be. But if you don't send in the paperwork, and you are required to send in the paperwork, they will charge you a fine. The other thing is you are required to maintain all of your records and your receipts. So if you want to claim something on a tax return, you have to keep your receipts. And if the government asks to see it, you have to prove it to them. And if you don't prove it to them, they don't have to give you the deduction or the credit that you are asking for, which generally means you have to pay some more tax. And then if you claim something on a tax return that you can't prove yourself, you usually have to pay penalties and interest as well. So two parts of the self-assessment system. One is making sure you know your filing deadlines and making sure you actually file if you need to file. And the other is you have to keep all of your records and your receipts yourself, and you have to send those into the government if they ask for them. Okay, so we've done the first two pillars. We're going to jump ahead to the third, which is a progressive tax system. In Canada, we have a progressive tax system, which means the more money you make, the more taxes you pay. So we've probably heard about a thing called tax rates. Does anyone know, either you can look this up in the textbook if you have it with you, or you might just know from yourself, what is the highest amount of federal tax that you pay? If you're in the top, what we call tax bracket, how much tax do you pay on the income at the top tax bracket? If you're not sure and you want to find this, so Karina says 45%. You're not entirely wrong, but you're also not 100% correct. We're talking federal tax only. 33%. Now the 45% number you may have heard of, that number can go even higher. It can go up to 55%. It is a combination of tax that you are paying where you're paying both provincial and federal tax at the top rate. So that can vary depending what province you're in. But the highest federal tax bracket is 33%. However, what gets confusing for people is if you are in that top tax bracket, you're not paying 33% on 100% of your income. So I'm going to show a little slide that might help explain this. When you are in a progressive tax system, you start in the bottom tax bracket. Everybody starts at the bottom tax bracket. Now, the numbers I have here, you do not need to memorize. We will talk about where to look them up in next class. But what they do is they change every year. So depending on inflation, we know inflation is not great right now. These numbers will change over time. But the ranges are generally about the same. So I will not have these numbers memorized because they change every year, and I've been doing tax for a lot of years now. But I know that roughly 40, it was been 47 in my head to about 50. Somewhere in there is the first tax bracket. The actual number for 2021 was $48,535. The first $48,535 that you earn, you will pay 15% tax on. Minus any credits that you have, we'll talk about that later. But generally speaking, every dollar of the first $48,535, you pay 15%. The very next dollar, you will pay 20% on. So all of the money between $48,535 up to $97,069, all of the money in that bracket, you will pay a little more tax on. You're still paying 15% on the first bit, but when we move up a tax bracket, the next chunk of money, you're going to pay 20.5%. And if you get into the next tax bracket, every dollar above that will be taxed at a higher rate. That's 26%. Every dollar above that, every dollar above $150,473 will be taxed at 29%. And when we get into the very, very top tax bracket, again, these are all federal. There are tax brackets provincially, but they look different. We'll look at that when we get to the provincial. When we get into the top tax bracket federally, it's 33%. Okay? So the more money you make, the more tax you pay, but you don't pay the same tax rate on every dollar that you earn. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that? Okay, so I'm going to show you something about how to find tax rates and then how to find the tax rates for different provinces. And then we'll do one more thing and then we'll take one more break. So bear with me here. But I'm going to stop my slideshow and I'm going to go in now to a website. And in this case, I'm also going to show you while I'm doing this the other way to access your fillable forms. So there's two reasons to follow along for right now. You're going to see me do this a lot. So we can find our fillable forms, we can find our provincial forms in Inkling in our tax reference guide. But if we want the most up-to-date accurate information, or maybe you're doing this in a future year, or you want to find the tax rates for an older year, we can get all of that information directly from the CRA. So I'm just going to Google CRA. And when I go into the CRA, I get a nice little search. And what I'm going to do in the search is I'm going to type in tax package and then the year that I'm looking for. And what I'll do is I'm going to put this in the chat window as well, just so that you can practice doing this yourself. It is how to find forms on the CRA. So if I put in tax package, because I'm looking for the package of tax files, I hit the search button, and the very first thing that's going to come up is the 2021 income tax package. So I'm going to pick the Manitoba one. And when I get the Manitoba one, you can see at the top it's going to say Manitoba 2021 income tax package. What we have here are forms, and right now this changes over time as the CRA likes to change things around, but for last year and this year they have it organized in a way that I find very intuitive. I'm quite happy with it. We have the important forms at the top, federal forms on the left, provincial forms on the right. If you need an income tax return, you click on income tax return. If you need a schedule, you click on schedule. If you need a Manitoba tax return, the Manitoba tax forms are here. And then if you need Manitoba schedules, they are down at the bottom. So as an exercise, we're going to start with the income tax return. And you can open a fillable version if you want a fillable version, or just a blank version you can print and handwrite in. So we're going to use a lot of fillable forms. This is a really nice place to find the fillable forms. If for whatever reason the fillable form that we're looking for from our ULearn package is not opening, or there's something happening with the formatting, or it's missing a form, or you think there's a form that should be there, you can come find it on the CRA website. So we're going to go into the fillable. It'll open down at the bottom here. I can open it up, and now I have a tax return. I'm going to make this bigger so you can see my screen a little bit better. Nancy, does that look legible? Perfect. Thank you. And in this case, I'm going to jump down. We're going to look at this in more detail next week, but I'm going to jump all the way down to step 5, which is on the 5th page. And you're going to see we have tax brackets here. So let's try this out. If you have someone who has income, and we're going to talk about income more after the break, but if you have income of $30,000, which tax bracket will they be in? The first column, the second column, the third column, the fourth column, or the fifth column? $30,000 income. They're in the first column, and they will be paying 15%. And you're going to notice that we don't add any extra tax to that. If they're in the second tax bracket, you're going to notice that there is some tax we're going to add. That $7,353 in the second column there, my cursor is circling over it right now. I'm going to wiggle here. That portion there is all of the 15% tax paid on the money from the first tax bracket. So the first $49,020 for this tax return, and then $7,353 over here is added to it. So we're paying 50% on the first chunk of money and 20.5% on whatever money is left over. And we're going to practice this again, but you can see how the tax brackets work. I am noticing here that my slide was not updated to the 2021 numbers. It's still on the 2020 numbers, so the correct numbers are not the ones you're going to see in your slideshow when you email at the end of the class. So those are going to be 2020 numbers. These are the updated 2021 numbers. So that makes more sense to me. Like I said, I don't memorize these numbers. They change every year. I just know where to find them, and this is where we find them. So as an exercise, we're going to go back now. So I'm going to go back to my government, and I'm just going to use my back arrows to go to the original Manitoba page. And I'm going to ask you to use the Manitoba tax form and tell me how many tax brackets do we have in Manitoba. So we have 5 tax brackets federally. In Manitoba, you can use the fillable form if you want. How many tax brackets do we have? And I'm going to wait a minute before I open it so you guys can find it on your own. I see a couple of numbers there. The nice thing on the Manitoba form, the tax brackets are right at the top. Again, I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger here so you can see them. In Manitoba, we have 3 tax brackets. So everyone who earns $33,723 in 2021 or less is paying 10.8% to the province. If you are earning $33,723 up to $72,885, you're in the second bracket at 12.75. And if you're in the third at 17.4, everyone earning more than $72,885 in Manitoba is in the highest provincial tax bracket that we have. You're not in the highest tax bracket federally, but in the province you're in the highest tax bracket from that point on. And it is the same. It is progressive, so you pay a lower tax rate on the first bucket of dollars that you earn, and every additional tier you pay a little bit more. Okay, now if you're curious, you can also use this to find other provinces' tax brackets. And we're going to practice filling these in again in the future as we get to those pages on the tax return. But just if you were curious, I'm going to go all the way back now to my search, and I'm going to say, what if I was looking for Alberta? And I want to know about the tax brackets in Alberta. Well, then I need to find an Alberta income tax package. Federally will be the same. We don't need to do that. The federal forms are the same everywhere in the country, no matter where you are, including Quebec. But provincially, it is different. So let's take a look at Alberta. And you'll notice Alberta has 5 tax brackets, but what is the rate for the first tax bracket in Alberta? In Manitoba, it was 10.8, I think. 10.4 or 10.8. I'd have to look it up again. But in Alberta, what is it? 10. So it's less. How much income do you have to have in Alberta before you go up a tax bracket? Remember, in Manitoba, it was about $77,000, $78,000. In Alberta, and that's the highest tax rate in Manitoba was $78,000. You're in the lowest tax rate in Alberta until you earn $131,220. Everyone in Alberta who earns less than that is in the lowest tax bracket provincially. So remember how I said if we got to pick what province we were going to be resident of, we might move there to pay less tax. There are other things that happen in Manitoba that they don't get in Alberta. We have a lot more refundable tax credits. We'll talk about those as we go on. But you will find every province has a completely different set of tax rates provincially. So if you're curious, you now know how to find the CRA website. Yeah, 10.8%. There we go. And you know how to navigate around it and poke around and check things out in our province, in different provinces, and you can see what you see. All right, we do have a few more things to do, but I want to give us one more break because today has been a lot of me talking and a little bit less of you doing. I'm hoping that all future classes will be more doing and less talking. Let's just take a quick 5-minute break. So we're going to come back at 11:13, and we'll just pause for now. Okay, welcome back from break. I know that was a short break. We tend to I'll do lots of little short breaks rather than a big long one. Most days, just because it gets us back. If you are back from break, give me an emoticon to let me know how you're feeling, or a green check mark just to say I'm here, whatever you prefer. Good. I'm going to give myself some sunglasses because I'm actually feeling pretty good about where we are and how much we have to get through in the next 45 minutes roughly of class. So we're well on track to finish chapter 1. Okay, I'm going to wait to see a few more people come back from break. Again, I'm going to stress as much as possible, we do need to be on time for this class. So starting right at 9, coming back from breaks on time as much as possible. Today is one of the lightest in terms of theory and material we have to cover. So some days are going to be really intense, and we're just going to go as fast as we can, and I don't want anyone missing valuable information. All right, well, I'd see about half the class is back, and everyone else hopefully will catch up. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. Pull out my chat and participants window. You can do the same. And I'm going to go in to my slideshow. And now we're going to talk more about reasons to file a tax return, why you would file a tax return or why you would need to file a tax return. And so it is important to know the difference between being required to file and wanting to file. But it is also important to remember not everyone needs to file a tax return. So there are definitely people who don't file tax returns in Canada, and that's perfectly fine. Then there are lots of people who probably should file a tax return because if they do, they'll get something that they won't get if they don't file. But then there's a category of people who have no choice. They must file tax returns, and if they do not file tax returns, there can be penalties. So generally speaking, if you owe tax, you must file a tax return. So if you are in a situation where you know for a fact you're going to be owing tax that year, it's very important that you come into an office and you make sure you file on time. If you are owing tax and you file a tax return late, there will be penalties in addition to interest. So it's interest for being late and then penalties on top of that because you should have filed on time and you did not. Also, if you dispose of capital property, so I'm using some technical terms here. Does anyone know what capital property means? If you don't, that's all right. I just want to see kind of where the class knowledge is. So when I say capital property, what am I talking about? Any ideas? So rental, yes, if what you mean is land or building, including your home, principal residence. Capital property really means stuff. So it's just a very fancy way of saying things that you can touch. Now, that usually we think of land and buildings, but this also includes investments like shares. Now, that's a bit more nebulous. In the old days, you could touch shares because if you bought shares on the stock market, you would get a certificate that said, I own these shares, and you could touch that. Now it's all electronic, but investment assets are also capital property. So investments that you own, shares, stocks, mutual funds, that kind of thing, land, buildings, boats, coin collections, antique furniture, stuff that has value is what we're talking about when we talk about capital property. Anytime that you sell capital property in that year, you must file a tax return. You do not have a choice. You must file a tax return. Some of those tax returns, the tax consequences of selling that type of property are beyond the scope of this course, but some of them are things that happen all the time, and we are going to teach it in the course. The two big ones we're going to do are the types of shares and stocks that are held, usually things that you would get through an investment portfolio that you get issued a tax slip for. We're going to deal with that in this course. Or the big one is your principal residence. If you sell the home you're living in, you must file a tax return. And I'm going to teach you in this course how you will do that on a tax return to make sure that you don't have to pay tax on the home that you are living in when you sell it. So we'll talk about that later in the course. But in those two scenarios on the screen, tax owing and disposition of capital property, you must file a tax return. You do not have a choice. Now, there are times when you would want to file a tax return. For example, if you are entitled to a refund, so if you have paid more tax throughout the year from your employer than you needed to pay, the government has to give the money back to you, but they only will give the money back to you if you file a tax return. So in that case, you should file a tax return, or the government will keep your money. Does anyone know how many years back you can go to collect old refunds if you had refunds and you didn't file? How far back can you go? I see some 3, some 7, some 10. Let's see if we've got a few more. So you can go back 10 years to file for old refunds. Now there's a few things, so some of those other numbers you're going to hear about, there's a few things you can't go back and claim. We'll talk about them when we get to them. There are some things you can only go back 3 years for, some things you can go back 4 years for. But generally speaking, if you're owed a refund, you can go back 10 years and still get your refund from the government. So if that applies to you by the end of this course, I recommend going and filling out the forms and filing those old tax returns and getting some money back from the government. All right. And the other big reason that people want to file a tax return is to receive government credits. Can anyone in the chat window name some of the types of government credits that you would receive? And if you're not sure, we're going to look at the textbook in a minute. There's a bunch of information in the textbook on this. So what kinds of credits are we getting? So we have child tax, right? It's called the Canada Child Benefit. Everyone calls it the child tax credit because that's what it used to be called when it wasn't a refundable credit. But the Canada Child Benefit is the big one, and GST benefits is the other big one that we're going to see. Those types of credits you have to file a tax return to get. I'm going to suggest one more, and now we're thinking about seniors. Does anyone know what happens if you are a senior, so you are 65 or older, generally speaking, you're receiving old age security and you have very low income? Does anyone know what benefit you might be entitled to if you're very low income and you're a senior, but you have to file a tax return to get it? Supplementary old age security, we call it the guaranteed income supplement. In order to get it, GIS, you have to file a tax return. So seniors may come in to file tax returns just so that they can get that credit as well. Good. How to know whether or not you need to file? Well, it's not what everyone thinks. First of all, lots of people have ideas about who has to file and when to file that are a little bit strange, so we're going to try to correct that today. I'm going to go into the return here. I'm going to go into my table of contents, and I'm going to find in Chapter 1 the page that we are looking for, which is not income subject to tax, requirements for filing. This is a really useful one to hang on to because it will tell you when you have to file and when you want to file. Really good page to have bookmarked, maybe a good page to print out as a reference, because before you ever file a tax return, you should be asking yourself, do I need to file this return? Do I want to file this return? If the answer is no, and you're charging clients for it, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. If the answer is yes, it's good to know why you're filing that tax return. So a couple of them have tax owing you must file. If you've taken money out under the Lifelong Learning Plan or the Home Buyers Plan, and you haven't repaid all of it yet, you have to keep filing tax returns until it is all repaid. Now, if you don't know what those are, don't worry, we're going to teach you that later on in the course when we get to RRSPs. But for those of you who do know what it is, if you have taken it out, if you have borrowed money from your RRSP, either to go back to school or to buy a home, you must file a tax return every year until you have repaid it. And for some people, they don't repay it for 20 years. So that's 20 years of tax returns you have to file every year. All right. And then there's a few where if you want to get the Canada Workers Benefit, that's extra refund money for people who are working but have low income. You have to file a tax return to get that. If you have been demanded by the CRA can say, I want you to file a return, please file it. Then you have to file a return. If you don't file a return and they've asked you to file one, you can get in trouble. They will file it for you. And they might not file it the way you want them to by putting credits in that you would like to claim. So if you get a demand letter, make sure you file that return by the deadline. And then there's a few other here as well. And then there are times that you want to. So if you want a refund, if you want Canada Workers Benefit, if you want to update your RSP deduction limit so that in the future you can make contributions to RSPs, that would be a good time to file your RSP. You can report your income that way. If you want your GST or HST credit, in Manitoba it's GST. If you want Canada Child Benefit, if you want Guaranteed Income Supplement, and the new one, which some of you might or might not have heard of, is the Climate Action Incentive. Right now, it's only 4 provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario, but if you live in those provinces and you want to get your Climate Action Incentive from the government, you must file a tax return. So this will tell you when you must file a tax return. Now, we're going to do another little thing. I do this every year. It's my favorite question to ask on the first day. What is the minimum age you have to be to file a tax return? How old do you have to be to file a tax return? Okay, I see some people say 16. Any other ones? 14 or 16. I'm going to keep in mind here, we're looking at the page that says who has to file. It says an individual must file if they, what if I have a brilliant 5-year-old who is now a TikTok star, and they are making $1 million a year on TikTok? Does my 5-year-old have to file a tax return? Do they have taxable income in Canada? Yes. Are they going to owe tax? Because remember, on that $1 million, nothing was deducted. Yes. My 5-year-old TikTok star must file a Canadian tax return. There is no minimum age. This is really important because I don't know where, but we get it in our heads that when you turn 18, you have to start filing tax returns. Or when you get your first job, you have to start filing tax returns, or whatever number we come up with. That is not true. Okay, there might be a 10-year-old who needs to file a tax return. There might be a 30-year-old who doesn't need to file a tax return. And Brittany, yes, the idea of being taxed before you can vote, people don't like that. You're being taxed. You have no control of the government. The other thing is, it's just a thing. We think when we're an adult, we file taxes. But it is important to remember there are reasons why you might want to file a tax return before you turn 18. In fact, more important to remember in this class, there are reasons why you might need to file a tax return before you turn 18. So the question of are you filing a tax return or are you not filing a return, I want you to come back to this page every time I ask that question and really think about, is the person that I'm talking about, do they have anything on this list that says they should file? Because that's really the only question. We don't need to know how old they are to determine whether or not they're going to file a tax return. It comes down to, do they owe tax? Have they disposed of capital property? Now, some of these things won't be relevant. If you're 5 years old, you're not getting old age security, and you're not going to be filing for guaranteed income supplement. So those ones will not apply, and they are tied to age. But most of the things on this list can happen to anyone of any age. So that's really important to remember. The criteria has nothing to do with age. It's 100% to do with residency in Canada. And then after we've established that you're filing a Canadian tax return, do you need to file? Come back to this page and look at it from there. Okay, let's go back to my slides. And here we go. And when do we have to file? Well, personal tax returns are due by April 30th. Self-employed people, self-employed are people who own their own businesses. They can be a formal business where they have partnership documents and all kinds of legal stuff, or it can just be a job that they do for fun, something they do on the side, or something they do seriously, but they haven't set up a legal entity of any kind. It's just I teach music lessons. People come, they take a lesson, they pay me money. I am now self-employed. Self-employed people and their spouses do not have to file until June 15th. Okay. For those of you who've read ahead in the text or who have done this before, what date do you have to pay your taxes owing by? So if your taxes are due on April 30th, what date do you have to pay any taxes owing before which they will start to charge interest? April 30th. Excellent. If you are self-employed, you do not have to file your taxes until June 15th, but what date do you have to pay the taxes owing by? April 30th. This is something a lot of people don't know. You don't have to file the return until the 15th of June, but you must pay the taxes owing by April 30th. It's going to be hard to know how much tax is owing until you have prepared the return. But if you have a self-employed client, and again, this is a bit beyond the scope of this course, if you have a self-employed client and they know they're going to owe approximately a certain amount, you want to encourage them to pay upfront. And then when you file the return, we can adjust whatever we need to bring the interest down. The reason for the delayed date is just that when you're self-employed, filing a tax return requires you to pull a lot more paper together. You have to calculate a lot more things. You need to have your receipts. It takes time to get organized. The government gives people the time, but they still want their tax money when they want their tax money, which is April 30th. The only other thing I want you to be careful of, what happens if April 30th falls on a weekend? If April 30th is on a weekend, what happens to the due date for tax returns and the due date for taxes owing? It will be the next business day. You might remember this if you filed taxes last year because that happened last year. I believe April 30th was a weekend, which means we had until the next Monday to file. So that's nice. Gives us a few extra days of hanging on to our money before we have to give it to the government. Okay, excellent. Let's talk about what income is, because I've been saying income, but we haven't defined what income is. Generally speaking, we talk about income in two ways. There is what is income as a whole, and then what is income that has to show up on a tax return, and those are two different things. Income really just means any money that is coming to you, or anything of value, anything that is worth money that is coming to you. Sometimes you'll get paid in cash, or essentially, you get money put in your bank account by your employer when you do your payroll, but sometimes you get other things that we call other taxable benefits. Can someone give me some examples in the chat window of what an other taxable benefit is? Something you might get from your employer that is not cash, is not money in your bank account. Okay, health insurance absolutely is one of them. Access to a company car. Some employers will pay for your living, your cost, where you're staying. For example, if you are clergy members, if you are a member of a church who is leading a church, you might have your housing paid for you by the church, and that will be a taxable benefit. You might get an award over a certain amount of money. Your company might give you shares of the company. Those are all sources of income. Even though they're not cash, you have more value, things that are worth things to you, than you did before you worked. And so those things are also considered income. That being said, not all income is what we call subject to tax. Not all income has to show up on a tax return. It is important to know in Canada, we do not look at only income earned in Canada. We need to know on a tax return what is all of your income from anywhere in the world. We tax world income in Canada. So when you're filing a Canadian tax return, you have to say income from anywhere. Income from employment, income from investments, whether that investment is in Canada or outside. If you're working for a company outside of Canada, you still have to report that as income on your tax return. And Edwin asks, what about an education fee paid by the company? Yes, if the company is paying or your education, there are two ways that they'll handle it. Either they will tax you on it, in which case you can claim an education credit. We'll talk about that when we get to students. Or they will not make it taxable. It will just be a company benefit you don't have to pay tax on, in which case you don't get to claim student credits. So we'll talk about education fees more. But generally speaking, when we're talking income, at least for the purposes of today, we're talking about any benefit that you get from your employment or from your assets. What shows up on a tax return is income from an office. We're talking about something you've been appointed or elected to. So judges will hold an office, or MPs will hold an office. Prime Minister of Canada has an office, that kind of thing. Most of the clients we see will have employment. So anything from those sources, think of it as salaries and all of the things that go with a salary, or income from a business or property. So income from a business that you run, or income from property. Maybe you're renting out a piece of land or a building. Maybe you are renting out the use of some of your assets. Or maybe the property that you have is an investment and it pays dividends. And so that investment is earning money for you. All of that is subject to tax, has to show up on a tax return. Capital gains is just a fancy way of saying if you sell something for more money than you bought it for, you will have a capital gain, and that is income, and it is subject to tax. We see that most often with stocks and shares, but for example, you might own a summer cottage. And if you own a summer cottage that is not your principal residence, and you bought it for $80,000 way back in the 70s, and now you're selling it, and it turns out it's in Muskoka and it's worth $3 million, then some of that is going to be taxable. We'll talk about a little bit of that later. But capital gains is when you make money by selling a thing. And then there's this category that says other things that the Income Tax Act says. So the rule here is if it's on the list in the legislation, it has to show up on a tax return. If it's not on the list, it doesn't have to show up on the tax return. So obviously, I'm not going to make you read the entire Tax Act yourself. We have a really nice summary of what is not included in income. So the most common things that are not included in income are on this list, on this page in the tax return. So if you give everyone a chance to find that page, you're going to notice gifts and inheritances. If someone gives you an inheritance, you don't have to worry about it. If it is winnings from gambling, you don't have to pay tax on it unless you are a professional gambler, because if you're a professional gambler, what happens to your earnings, your gambling winnings? If you gamble for a living and that is your business, what happens to your winnings? They become your income because it is your business income. I have had this happen. I have had a client who was a professional gambler. They were a really really advanced poker player, and they went to poker tournaments all over the world, and they had to report their gambling winnings. Whereas most people, you're gambling for fun, you're going to a casino, you're scratching off a lottery ticket, and those winnings from gambling or recreation are not only not taxable, they don't show up anywhere on the tax return. Okay, there's a whole list of things here. We're going to test this out a little bit and get you guys interacting as well in the class. So I'm just going to go to my next slide. Oh, that slide did not work the way that I wanted it to. Give me a minute here. I'm going to see if I can fix that slide. Okay. You know, I don't think I'm going to be able to. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to do it on a whiteboard. So bear with me here. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to open up a whiteboard. Share a new whiteboard. And I'm going to type some things. And what I'm going to have you say is mark on the left side, taxable, right side for not taxable. Okay, and we're going to start over here with salaries or commissions from an employer. Okay, and I'm going to start adding a bunch of things, and you can just use your annotations and add if you think it is taxable or not taxable. Okay, let's start with those ones. So we have salaries or commissions from an employer. Most people are saying yes. A few people are saying no. Salaries, 100% you're going to pay tax on your salaries. Okay, babysitting fees for a friend. Is that income from employment or income from self-employment? Absolutely it is. Technically, it is income that needs to show up on your tax return. We will talk about that in Chapter 2. Winnings from American Cruise Line, no, not taxable in Canada. Where might winnings from an American Cruise Line be taxable? You might have to pay tax on it, but not in Canada. Where will you have to pay tax on that? If you go on an American cruise and you go all over the place on that cruise and you gamble a whole lot and you win a bunch, you might have to file an American tax return for that year to report your U.S. winnings. But in Canada, they don't have to show up on the tax return anywhere. And Brittany, there are a lot of 13-year-old babysitters who don't know they're supposed to be paying taxes. They probably don't have to pay taxes because we're going to learn about tax credits, which take money that would be taxable and make it not taxable. So those 13-year-olds, if they're not earning enough money that they're going to owe tax, they don't have to file a return. But if they had to file a return, that income would have to show up on it. And that's why we don't worry about it when we're talking about people with low income and they have babysitting fees. But people with higher income and they have reasons why they're filing a tax return, they should be including any earnings from odd jobs, including things like this. And a lot of people don't know this. We find this out when we have client interviews, and we'll talk more about that. All right, interest in a bank account, taxable or not taxable? Absolutely taxable. Does anyone know how you can find out how much interest was earned in your bank account last year? Because most people don't get a tax slip for that. Some people get a tax slip. If you earn more than, I believe it's $50 in interest, you usually get a tax slip. But if you don't get a tax slip, how do you find out how much interest your bank account earned last year? Remember, this is a self-reporting system, bank statements. Technically, again, I say technically because there's what we should be doing and there's what most people do. We should be asking our clients how much interest they made in their bank accounts. If it's $1 or $2, it's not going to change the tax return. We're not going to worry about it. But all interest in bank accounts is reportable on a tax return and theoretically taxable. Interest in a TFSA. TFSA is the hint. You may not know what that is, but I'm going to put that one over here. Interest in a TFSA. Is that taxable or not taxable? I see a whole bunch of saying not taxable. You are correct, and the clue is in what it is. If you know that TFSA is a tax-free savings account, all of the interest earned in a tax-free savings account is not taxable. Excellent. Good. We're going to do a bunch more. So I'm going to share another whiteboard. Same thing, left side for yes, right side for no. Let's try this one. Let's try this one. And we'll do one more, which is my favorite one. All right, I have lots of people saying dividends earned from shares. Yes, it does need to show up on a tax return, and it is taxable. profits from selling illegal drugs, totally taxable, absolutely taxable, business taxes. How will the government know that you have profits that need to be reported if what you are doing is selling illegal drugs, where I'm guessing you're not keeping receipts and expensing things? Brittany says no one's going to report that. That is not technically true. So the government can take a look and see if your lifestyle makes sense. So if you have very large deposits of money and no explanation for where those deposits are, they may look into that. So the sort of everyone's favorite tax joke is they never caught Al Capone in court for criminal activity. They never proved that he committed criminal activity. He went to jail for tax fraud, for not reporting income. They knew that he had income and he didn't report it. I have had clients who work in what we would call gray areas, industries that may or may not be a bit complicated to explain where the money is coming from. We have ways of reporting that so that they are still reporting what they need to be reporting and paying tax on their income. And it is still something that technically needs to happen. There are different line numbers where that can show up, and we may talk about it as well. Again, you're not going to see this all the time, but definitely it is still taxable and reportable. And if they don't report it and they get caught for not reporting it, you can actually go to jail for committing tax fraud. So that is a thing. Obviously, this isn't going to come every day. It's just important to know profits from selling illegal drugs, technically business profits. Okay, that's the fun one. That's the one I have fun with every year. Right, let's go on to income types. So I'm going to go back to my slideshow. No, I'm going to share my screen first. All right, let me do that. Okay, so we have three different types of income that show up on a tax return. The first section on the tax return is total income. That's where we put all of the income that is reportable on a tax return. Anything that needs to show up on a tax return goes there. If it's on the list as something that's not reportable, you're not going to put it anywhere. If it shows up, if it's on the list as something that is subject to income tax, you're going to add it to total income. We then have two more figures on the tax return that we use to calculate things. One is net income and one is taxable income. Total income is all of the income together. Net income, we get a figure based on certain things that are called deductions. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in the next couple chapters. Deductions are things that you are allowed to take away from your income before we calculate your taxes and before we calculate what your income level is for many other things related to the tax return. So when we're calculating benefits and we're calculating refundable credits, we use net income for that. So for example, Canada Child Benefit, we take your net income figure, not your total income figure. So some of the things we can deduct, we're going to take a look at that in a minute. And then after we've calculated net income, we use that to calculate any benefits you're getting. We use it for your GST credit. We use it for Canada Child Benefit. We use it for Guaranteed Income Supplement, all of those types of things. We then have some additional deductions, a few specific things, and that gives us taxable income. Taxable income tells you what tax bracket you're in. So net income is used for your benefits. Taxable income is used for taxes owing. Okay. The best way to take a look at this is just to look at a tax return. I've got a bunch of slides that are just the pages of the tax return, but I think they're going to be too fuzzy for you to see if I leave them in this format. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to click through these, and I'm going to go in back to my tax return, which I'm going to switch back to being Manitoba. I'm going to go back to my Manitoba income tax package. Again, you can find a really legible version of this by going to the CRA website and searching for tax package, or you can go into your tax reference guide to find a viewable version of it, or you can use your fillable forms, your downloadable forms. But I'm going to go into it here just so that we can have a nice big one on our screen to make it bigger. We're going to look at these pages in more detail starting next chapter. The first 2 pages are information pages. For the income, this is total income. I want you to notice the first number of all of these is the same. What number do we always see when we are adding income to a return? So all of these have line numbers on them. What is the important number that tells us that we're adding income onto the return? All right, Leon says 1. Leon, you are correct. Everyone, I want you to notice every single line number on here starts with a 1. And there will be a category that will tell you what type of income it is. So you're going to see employment income is the most common. So we see that right at the very top. Line 10100 is employment income. You're going to see old age security about midway down, line 11300. CPP income. We might have pension income. We might have EI income, employment insurance, which includes maternity leave. We might have dividends. We might have interest. We might have RRSP income. We might have RDSP income, all the different kinds of income. Workers' compensation, social assistance payment, federal supplements, all of those things. If we're adding income on the return, it will start with a number 1 on the tax return. Okay. Then we get a total number, which is total income. Then we get to deduct things. What are some of the things we're going to deduct? What are the sorts of things that we do not want to have included in income when we are calculating benefits? Take a look at line 20800. Take a look at line 21400. So RRSPs, if you contribute to RRSPs, you can reduce what your total income is, so it makes your net income smaller. If you have childcare expenses, it reduces your income so that when we calculate your benefits, we are using a lower income number to calculate those benefits. You'll see moving expenses on there. You're going to see a few other things. A new line that we didn't have before is the federal COVID-19 benefit repayment. If you have repaid COVID benefits, it will reduce your net income for this year. So those are the things that bring us net income. What line number are you seeing? What is the first number of all of the lines on deductions? So these are things that come off before we calculate taxable income. It is a 2. If you have a 2, you are taking money off the tax return. If you have a 1, you're adding money on. If you have a 2, you're taking money off the tax return. Excellent. And that gets us a net income figure. And then you're going to notice there's a few other deductions that get us a taxable income. We're going to talk about a lot of these next chapter, so we're going to do this in more detail next chapter, but you'll see things like the Canadian Armed Forces and Police deduction, capital gains deduction we're not really going to cover very much in this course, but other payments deduction, line 25000. That's because some things are reportable. For example, social assistance. If you are receiving social assistance, it is not taxable, but it is still income. It goes into the income line on the correct line for that, which is a 1 number, and then it comes off taxable income. Okay, and we're going to refresh all of this later. Are there any questions about income on the tax return? We're still speaking broadly. We're going to get into the details of it starting next chapter. Okay. We have 8 minutes left, so I am going to jump back to the slides. Let's see if we can get everything done. Where did my slides go? There we go. Tips. Yes, tips are income. Tips get added to line 10400 because they are what's called other employment income. It's not your basic salary income, but it is related to your employment, and there is a line for that, and they are taxable. And so they go on line 10400, and then they don't actually ever come off. we have to pay tax on them. All right, let's talk quickly about how you file. There are different ways of filing return. You can paper file. Paper filing just means printing out all the forms, filling them in by hand or typing them in if you have fillable forms, signing the bottom, and mailing them to the CRA. The CRA does not like people paper filing because every time it's paper filed, someone physically has to pick it up and look at it, and it takes them a lot of time. It also delays the processing. It used to be paper files, we would tell clients 6 to 10 weeks probably it'll be filed. Now, after the pandemic especially, we've been telling clients 4 or 5 months in some cases before their paper file gets registered. If you have benefits that you're waiting for, like Canada Child Benefit, GST benefit, climate action incentive, guaranteed income supplement, and you paper file, it can delay those benefits getting to you. It used to be that you could go to the post office and ask for a copy of a paper tax return and get it. Fewer places are doing that now. So the number one place that you go to get paper forms is the CRA website. And that is always a place where you can get up-to-date, accurate paper filing forms. However, government prefers electronic filing. There are 2 ways to file electronically. There's e-file and net file. Can anyone tell me in the chat window what is the difference between e-file and net file? So I predominantly do e-filing. And Leon says one is professional, or Helene says one is a preparer. That's right. If someone else is doing it for you, it is e-filing. That might be an associate at H&R Block. It might be an associate at a different office or an accountant. But if somebody else is doing it for you and they are registered to do it, we use an e-file service. If you are doing it yourself, you're using the H&R Block Do-It-Yourself software, which you can get through our H&R Block main webpage. Or you might have heard of other tax programs like TurboTax, things like that. If you are filing your own, it's called net filing. And there's really no big difference between it. It's just who has to sign the forms. If you're net filing, it is your own name on the forms. If you're e-filing, you have to sign a form giving the e-filer permission to file that return on your behalf. And then there is a new thing, which is an automated phone service. There are a few taxpayers who have very, very simple returns, and they may be invited by the CRA to have the CRA file the return for them. And if that is something that they've been asked or invited to do, they will either get that notification in the mail, or if they have my account set up online, they'll get it through their mail online through the CRA website. They can phone into the CRA and verify their ID and then have the CRA file their return for them. That's a lot newer. That's really only for certain clients who have very, very basic tax returns and don't have very many things to claim on the return. So if you are working for a company like H&R Block, you will be e-filing. If you're looking to file your own tax return, you will be net filing. And then there are very few circumstances where you would paper file. Can anyone tell me in the course of this course, what are the times when we would want to paper file a return rather than electronically file it? So let's say, imagine yourself working in an H&R Block office. If someone dies, actually you can e-file final returns. So that's relatively new, but you can e-file a final return for someone. I'm thinking more of someone, especially younger people, we see this. Edwin filing for the first time, you can still e-file for the first time too. They've made it so you can e-file almost everything. What about someone who should have been filing returns but hasn't been? Why would we maybe need to paper file some of those returns? Older returns, you can't e-file. So remember how I said you can go back 10 years to get refunds and benefits? You can go back 10 years to get them, but right now I'm pretty sure, I think they've just updated it, but we can go back 4 years by e-file. Everything older than 4 years has to be paper filed. So in that case, if we're doing, and we've had clients, and Nancy, you can agree with me, we've had clients who come in and they haven't filed for 10 years, and they really should have filed for 10 years because they're going to get refunds. and they're going to get GST, and if they're in Manitoba, they're going to get climate action incentive and a few other things. And they're like, well, I want to file now. We will do as many years electronically as we can, and we file those ones right away. And then the rest of them we do by paper. We send them in, and we wait till they get processed, and eventually the client will get caught up. And in that case, we can see clients with some really, really big refunds. And Saskia says you had a couple who didn't file for 10 years each. Yeah, so that's 20 returns that you can do in an afternoon. And some of those families, especially if they have kids, there may be significant amounts of government money that they are entitled to that they have not accessed. And by filing those older returns, we can get them caught up. All right, we are almost done. I have 2 minutes. CRA online tools. This is all in your book. You can spend more time with it, but CRA has a lot of resources that you can use. The number one is My Account. If you have filed a return in the past, I recommend, if you can, sign up for My Account. It gives you access to all of your tax records with the CRA. You can see your prior returns that have been filed. They have a really neat button on it that will tell you if you have any checks that have been issued to you that didn't get deposited. There might be some money sitting there that you didn't know about. My Account will tell you that as well. There's also My CRA, which is the same thing, but it's a phone app. And My Benefits CRA, you can access GST department or the Canada Child Benefit Department, see if there are any benefits there. We're going to wait and see if they have the same thing for climate action incentive. That's new. They've changed that this year, so they may have that there as well. That's also on your phone. Represent a Client is something we use at H&R Block, where we can access our clients' data so that we can see what their tax slips are. We can see their prior tax returns. If you work for H&R Block, you will have to have a My Account set up so that you can get access to Represent a Client. And then whether you're e-filing or you're net filing, you also have something called autofill return. And this just means the tax software you're using will allow you to download any tax slips the CRA already has and put them into the software for you so you have that data. We'll be talking about that more when we get to the tax preparation software side of things. Okay. After you file your return, you get a notice of assessment. It is a summary of your taxes. It tells you whether or not you're getting a refund or you're owing. If it changed anything that you filed, if you filed with certain information and the CRA has amended that information for some reason, they will tell you what they changed and why they changed it. So for example, if you have a client who comes in and they tell you that they had 3 jobs last year and they give you 3 tax slips and you enter 3 tax slips, you file their return, but the CRA actually had 4 tax slips on file by the time they process the return, they'll be like, oh, well, we noticed that you missed some income, and they'll helpfully add it in for you. That kind of thing can happen. So any changes that you want to make sure you look into, why did they change something? Sometimes the CRA makes mistakes and we can fix it. Sometimes the CRA is right and then we just notice that the client didn't tell us something or they missed something. It also tells you what your RSP limit is. We'll talk about that. And you can you can choose to receive it paper or electronic. We have a few more slides, but I'm going to catch those up at the very beginning of next week. We're almost done. So we are now at 12 o'clock. What I'm going to say for the rest of the day, I'm going to stay online for a little bit. We'll stop recording very shortly, just as soon as I finish this. For next class, please make sure you have read and done the exercises in Chapter 1. You have read and done everything in Chapter 2, including the Chapter 2 review problem. That one is important because if you haven't done it, it's really hard. We go pretty quickly through those in class, so you want to have yours finished to look at it. And you will now have my email as well, so I'm going to make sure you can see that. And I will see everyone bright and early on Monday morning. Thank you very much for hanging in. It's nice getting to know all of you, and I'll see you all on Monday. There we go. All right. So welcome back to the very end of Chapter 1. We are going to finish off the last few slides that we didn't finish on our first day of class. That will happen on occasion, so bear with me when it does. We will always finish everything before we go away. Just a quick reminder of where we were at the end of last class. We were talking about notices of assessment. So notice of assessment is what happens when you file your tax return. Once the CRA has process that tax return, they're going to send you a summary statement saying either they agree with what you filed or they made changes to what you filed and confirming the results, whether you're getting a refund or you have a balance owing, whether if there's any penalties assessed, all of that will be available on the notice of assessment as well. What we didn't talk about very, very quickly at the end of last class is there is another option. So most people will get their notice of assessment 10 to 15 business days after they finish the return, after they submit the return online, or if it's paper, it takes longer to process. But 10 to 15 business days after it's been processed, the notice of assessment usually goes out. It can go in the mail, or if they have My Account set up, and they choose to have everything received electronically, it will go to them electronically. They'll get an email saying they have mail from the CRA. They can then log into their CRA account and get the mail that way. There is an option for some clients for an express notice of assessment, and this is still fairly new. You have to file electronically to get it. It has to be NetFile or eFile. Obviously, if it's paper return, they don't promise to do it immediately. Because it has to get to them first. It gives you instant assessment results. The minute that you file your return, right away your notice of assessment will be available. If you use the express notice of assessment, you will not be able to get a paper copy of your notice of assessment. It will only be sent for online, which means through the My Account, which means you can't use express notice of assessment if you're not signed up for online mail. You have to have that set up in advance. It isn't a guarantee, and we'll talk more when we get to the administrative chapters about the reason why there might be some returns that will be delayed before they're processed, but most people will qualify for express notice of assessment if they want it. This can be useful especially for clients who have returns where they really need an answer right away. Maybe they've waited until they filed. Maybe they need their notice of assessment for mortgage purposes or to give to banks to get loans, things like that. They need the formal notice of assessment very quickly. Most of our clients, we find the notice of assessment official version, 10 to 15 days is soon enough. And also what you'll find if you are working in an office now is a lot of people who file the regular way, they e-file or net file. The notice of assessment won't get mailed out right away, but often if we have representative clients set up, we can actually see the assessment results. If not instantly, then within a day or two, they will be posted or available through My Account or through a representative client, even if the 10 days hasn't passed yet. So the official notice of assessment might not be ready right away, but we're finding that regular notice of assessments are being processed very quickly these days. Okay, any questions about the process when you file a return, notice of assessment, that kind of thing? Again, we're going to visit this in more detail when we get to our admin chapter. So if you have questions, ask them now, but if you prefer to wait until we've actually learned how to do a tax return, we are going to come back to this. Okay, and the very last thing, just a reminder, we did talk about tax returns in Canada are a self-assessment system. You are required to keep track of your own records. So most of the time when you file a tax return, you don't send proof of everything you put on the tax return. Some of it the CRA already has. They will have copies of any tax slips that you have, or they should have copies of any tax slips that you have. Your employers are supposed to send them copies. We'll talk about that a little bit today, what some of those tax slips might look like. Also, banks, financial institutions send tax slips to the CRA. However, if you're claiming deductions and credits, if you're trying to take money off the tax return or make it not taxable through deductions and through credits, then you need to keep your receipts. You don't need to send them unless they ask for them, but if they ask for them, you have to send them, and if you don't have them, they won't give you the deduction that you asked for or the credit that you asked for. They randomly review returns. They do this every year. You will usually get something called a request for info. Request for info, it doesn't mean your taxes were done wrong. It just means they want to see those credits on those deductions. They want to see the proof before they officially let you keep them. And in that case, you have 30 days to answer. And if in those 30 days you send in your receipts, they say that's great. And if you don't send in your receipts, they will reassess your return and decide that you owe them more money than they originally had agreed to. So the CRA is always presumed to be correct. unless you prove otherwise. They are the house rules, so they win unless you can prove your own records. You should keep everything at least 6 years, and we talked about this list class. I tell my clients 7 years just because they get mixed up. Tax years are always the year before the current year, so it is this year and then 6 years back. Okay. Excellent. So that's chapter 1. Thank you for bearing with me for chapter 1. We're going to switch over now and get set up for chapter 2.